Before we dive in, if you enjoy long-form lore content like this, please click that subscribe button down below. Before I move forward, I'm counting on you to support my channel by clicking that tiny subscribe button so that we can spread these amazing videos to folks like you around the world. Thank you. So I put this video together because Elden Ring has some of the most dense, fragmented, and genuinely fascinating lore in any game ever made. And I wanted to create something you could actually sit with for a long time, 8 hours of it. The kind of video where you can close your eyes and just let the story wash over you. When I was assembling this, I made a deliberate choice to follow the lore chronologically from the very beginning of the world, rather than organizing it by character or faction. That means we start long before the Tarnished ever sets foot in the lands between. I also chose to spend more time on the age of the Erdtree and the events leading up to the Shattering than most videos do, because that stretch of history is where almost everything important actually happens. Alright, let me take you back to the very beginning. Before the Erdtree, before the Golden Order, before any of the names and titles and wars that fill the history of the lands between, there was something older, something that existed before light had a colour or faith had a shape. The oldest layer of the world that Elden Ring presents to us is not gold, it is deep, dark, and red. The Crucible is the name given to this primordial state of existence. It suggests a kind of raw, undifferentiated life, a soup of potential, where all living things shed qualities freely. In the Crucible, creatures might grow tails, or extra limbs, or patches of scales, or feathers that belonged to no bird anyone had ever named. Life was abundant and strange and uncategorized. There was no hierarchy to it. Things simply were. The incantations in the game that draw on Crucible power show us what this looked like in practice. Aspects of the Crucible, tail for instance, summons a heavy draconic tail from the caster's body. Aspects of the Crucible, breath, calls up a gout of flame, not unlike a dragon's. These spells are described as belonging to the most ancient form of the Erdtree's bounty, which is interesting phrasing because it suggests that even the Erdtree has roots that stretch back into the Crucible, that the Golden Order we come to know is not a replacement for the Crucible so much as a refinement of it, or, depending on how you read it, a suppression. What lived in the Crucible era is not entirely clear. Dragons are among the oldest creatures in the world, and they were certainly present. The ancient dragons, massive and stone-scaled, and unlike the dragons you fight in later parts of the game, predate almost everything else in the lore. The Fell God is referenced in connection with fire and the dragons, though the exact nature of that relationship is left deliberately vague. There are suggestions that the ancient dragons worshipped fire in some form, or that fire worshipped them, or that the Fell God and fire are in some sense the same thing expressing itself through different vessels. The Crucible was not a peaceful era, it was simply an old one. Life competed, consumed, and changed, but it was a world without the particular kind of violence that comes from ideology. There were no crusades in the Crucible. No one was executed for having the wrong number of limbs. That would come later. Into this ancient world came something from outside it, or perhaps it had always been there, dormant, waiting. The Elden Ring is described as the foundation of the Golden Order, the source of the rules that govern life, death, rebirth, and grace in the lands between. But the Elden Ring did not create itself. It is held in the hands of the Erdtree, and the Erdtree exists because of a god. Her name is Marika. But before we get to Marika, we need to talk about the Greater Will. The Greater Will is one of the outer gods referenced throughout the game. The lands between is a world that sits beneath the influence of multiple vast, incomprehensible forces from beyond it, and these outer gods each have their own interests, their own instruments, and their own definitions of what the world should be. The Greater Will is the one that won, at least for a while. It is the outer god whose influence shaped the current age, whose preferred instrument is the Elden Ring itself. The greater will is never seen. It communicates, if communication is even the right word, through intermediaries. The two fingers are the most prominent of these, pairs of enormous, flesh-pale digits that sit curled in dark chambers across the lands between, murmuring guidance to those who will listen. The two fingers speak in a language called the Elden language, which only the finger readers, old women hunched under the weight of their craft, can interpret. The guidance the two fingers offer is always aimed in the same direction, toward order, toward the restoration of the Elden Ring, toward the greater will's vision of what existence should look like. What that vision actually is, the game leaves somewhat open. The greater will seems to want a world governed by the Elden Ring's laws, a world where life and death follow predictable paths, where grace flows to those deemed worthy, where the power of the Erd Tree touches everything. Whether this is good or bad depends entirely on who you ask and what the alternative looks like. Marika was not born a god. This is one of the most important things to understand about her, and one of the things the game is most careful about revealing slowly. She came from somewhere. She had a people. She was Numen, a race of humans described as being from a land outside the lands between, said to have lifespans slightly longer than average, said to have a closer affinity to the divine. There are very few Numen left by the time the game takes place, but the ones we know about are significant. Marika is the most significant of all. Her descendant, Melina, may be another. The Queen of the Round Table, Enia, the finger reader, who translates the two fingers' guidance for the player, is also Numen. How Marika came to be the vessel of the Elden Ring is a story the game only partially tells. What we can piece together is that she was chosen. The greater will selected her as its instrument, and she accepted or was given no real choice in the matter, depending on how charitable you want to be toward the forces involved. She became the god of the lands between. She held the Elden Ring within herself, and through it shaped the laws of the world. One of the first things she did, or one of the first things she's associated with, was the killing of Godwyn the Golden's future, which is getting ahead of ourselves. Let us go back further. The early era of Marika's reign is sometimes called the Age of the Erd Tree, though the tree itself predates this label in some form. The Erd Tree is vast and golden, and its light touches everything. It is the physical presence of the Elden Ring's authority in the world. Those who die in the lands between are meant to return to the Erd Tree, their souls gathered and recycled through its roots, their bodies eventually rising again. This cycle of death and rebirth is a gift officially, a sign of the greater will's favour. Death in the lands between is not supposed to be permanent, except for some people. The outer gods, other than the greater will, have their own ideas about death and life, and some of them produced alternatives. One of these alternatives is the Rune of Death. The Rune of Death is exactly what it sounds like. It is the portion of the Elden Ring that governs true death, the kind from which there is no return to the Erd Tree, no recycling, no grace. Marika, at some point early in her reign, or at least in a period the game associates with consolidating the Golden Order's power, removed the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring. She gave it to a man named Maliketh. Maliketh is one of the stranger and more tragic figures in the lore. He is Marika's shadow, her black blade, half-brother in some readings of the scattered references to his origins. He is described as her shadow, which in the context of Elden Ring carries specific meaning. A shadow is a servant bound absolutely, chosen before birth, loyal unto death and beyond it. Maliketh accepted the Rune of Death and sealed it within himself, within his own body, locked away from the world. This act had enormous consequences. Without the Rune of Death active in the world's laws, true death became almost impossible for the inhabitants of the lands between. Those who died simply waited in a spectral state, or returned to the Erd Tree, or wandered as spirits. Death, as a finality, was effectively outlawed. The Golden Order presented this as grace. There is another reading, which is that removing death from the world makes the population of that world permanently subject to whoever controls the Erdtree's cycle of rebirth. That the removal of the rune of death is, depending on your interpretation, a gift or a cage. Marika's first husband, or one reading of her first significant political relationship, brings us to the Elden Lord Godfrey. Godfrey is introduced to the player early. You see his ghost in Stormvale Castle, a massive golden figure with a lion companion, the remnant of an Elden Lord who stood at Marika's side in the Age of Conquest. His story is one of the most melancholy in the entire game. Godfrey was a warrior. He was human, no divine blood, no connection to the outer gods, just a man of exceptional ferocity and martial ability. He became Marika's first Elden Lord after distinguishing himself in the wars that established the Golden Order's dominance over the lands between. The early age of the Golden Order was not peaceful. It was bought with war. The major conflicts of this era involved the giants, the dragons, the ancient Crucible-aligned forces, and various other powers that existed in the lands between before the Erdtree's light touched everything. Godfrey led the armies that crushed these opponents one by one. The war against the giants is particularly significant. The fire giants lived in the mountaintops of the giants, the frozen peaks in the game's northeast. They are enormous creatures with a body plan that should not work. Their upper torsos grafted onto their own severed lower halves, moving on their hands across the snow. They were guardians of the fell flame, the fire that could, if it reached the Erdtree, burn it entirely. The fell god associated with this fire was their patron. Godfrey led the campaign against the giants. He killed all of them save one. One fire giant was left alive, cursed to tend the flame and never let it go out, bound by that curse to remain in the mountains forever. This detail becomes enormously important later. The decision to leave one giant alive, to let the flame persist, suggests that even at the height of her power, Marika may have been planning for something she did not yet speak aloud. With the giants defeated and the dragons largely subjugated, the major military campaigns that established the Golden Order came to an end. Peace of a sort settled over the lands between. And then Marika did something unexpected. She stripped Godfrey of his grace. Grace in the lands between is the mark of the Erdtree's favour. It is what separates those who can return from death through the Erdtree's cycle from those who cannot. To lose grace is to be cast out, made mortal in the truest sense, cut off from the world's divine infrastructure. Marika took this from Godfrey and banished him and his warriors from the lands between. Godfrey did not resist. This is one of the things about him that makes him so interesting. He accepted the exile. He led his followers, the Tarnished as they came to be called, out into the lands beyond, the world outside the lands between, and was gone. The game suggests several possible readings of this exile. One is that Marika needed her warriors gone because the wars were over, and a standing army of grace-blessed demigods was a political problem. Another is that she sent them away because she was planning something that required their absence. A third, supported by some of the more oblique references in the game, is that the Tarnished being exiled and then called back later was always part of a plan, that Marika intended to eventually summon them home to perform some specific function. After Godfrey came Radagon. This is where the lore gets significantly more complicated and significantly more interesting. Radagon was, by all surface appearances, Marika's second husband. He had red hair and golden eyes and an imposing physical presence, and he was a figure of considerable martial and magical ability. He was also a champion of the Golden Order, devoted to its principles, a warrior and scholar both. By the time he entered Marika's life, he was already famous and already had children of his own. His first major relationship was with Renala, Queen of the Full Moon, the head of the Academy of Raya Lucaria, the great school of magical learning in Liurnia. Renala and Radagon had 3 children together: Radan, who would become one of the most beloved and tragic figures of his generation; Rykard, who would become one of the most horrifying; and Rani, who would become one of the most important to the story the player participates in. Then Radagon left Renala to become Marika's husband, an Elden Lord. Renala never recovered from this. The great scholars of Raya Lucaria, loyal to her personally, eventually revolted against their broken queen. They locked her in the Grand Library. She sits there still in the game's present, clutching a single amber egg, singing softly, surrounded by the debris of her grief, endlessly rebirthing imperfect approximations of living things from the amber she holds. Radagon and Marika's union produced children as well. Morgott and Morg, twin sons born with the mark of the omen, a deformity the Golden Order considered a curse, signs of the Crucible's influence manifesting in unexpected ways. They were hidden away at birth, confined beneath Leyendell in the sewers, their existence officially an embarrassment. Melania and Miquella, a daughter and son who were both born demigod by right, but each afflicted in their own way. Melania carries the Scarlet Rot, a corruption associated with one of the outer gods, the one that opposes the Erdtree's order. Miquella was cursed to never grow old, to remain in a child's body forever, regardless of the power accumulating inside him. And then there is the secret that the game holds back until fairly late, and then drops with almost no fanfare, presented as a carved inscription in Marika's prison, stated plainly. Radagon is Marika. They are the same person. One body, 2 souls, or perhaps one soul that split, or was always dual, or was made dual by the process of being chosen as the greater will's vessel. The precise mechanism is left unclear, but the fact of it is not. When Radagon appears in the game's final sequence, walking through a golden hall toward the Elden Ring, and then when Marika appears shattered and chained to the Elden Ring itself, they are the same individual, expressing 2 aspects of a single existence. What this means for the children is complicated. Morgott and Moog, Melania and Miquella are children of a person with themselves. The demigods of the Marika Radagon line exist in a family structure that does not map neatly onto anything human, and the internal conflict this dual nature created in that single body, whatever war was being fought between the Marika aspect and the Radagon aspect, runs underneath the surface of everything that follows. Marika shattered the Elden Ring. This is the central historical event of the game. Everything that happens in the present, every location you visit, every demigod you fight, every broken thing you encounter, flows downstream from this one act. The Elden Ring was shattered, its fragments, the great runes, scattered among Marika's children and their proxies. The shattering unleashed chaos across the lands between. And then something called the Elden Beast, the physical form of the greater will's power, which had been living inside Marika, emerged from her shattered body and imprisoned her, chaining her to the broken Elden Ring within the Erdtree's heart. Why did she do it? This is the question the game asks and then refuses to answer cleanly. There are theories, readings, fragments of evidence pointing in multiple directions. One reading is grief. Marika's firstborn son, Godwyn the Golden, was murdered. He was killed in an event called the Night of the Black Knives, and the manner of his death was unique and terrible. He was killed with weapons coated in a stolen fragment of the Rune of Death, the very rune that Malekith carried inside himself. This meant that Godwyn died truly, in a way that Erdtree could not reverse, except not entirely. What happened to Godwyn is one of the stranger events, in a lore full of strange events. His soul died, his body did not. His body remained soulless, still connected to the Erdtree's root system. Slowly, warping and spreading through the earth beneath the lands between, his deathless flesh extending through the roots, like a corruption that cannot be cured because the thing that is dead is not the part that keeps growing. Marika loved Godwyn. He was, by all accounts, the best of her children, beloved by everyone. A warrior of grace and generosity who seemed, uniquely among the demigods, to have no cruelty in him. His death broke something in Marika that could not be repaired, but grief alone may not fully explain the shattering. There are other readings. One is that Marika, over the course of her long reign, came to distrust the greater will, that she saw the golden order she had helped build and found something wrong at the centre of it. That shattering the Elden Ring was an act of rebellion, of someone refusing to continue being a vessel for a god whose vision she no longer shared. The fact that she removed the rune of death before the shattering, or was associated with events that suggest she had been thinking about this for a long time, supports this reading. Another reading is more specific and connects to Ranni. Ranni the witch is Radagon and Renala's daughter, and she is the character who, if the player follows her questline, offers an alternative ending to the game. She is also the one who organised the Night of the Black Knives. This is stated directly in the game. Ranni arranged Godwyn's murder. She used thieves trained by the Black Knife assassins, armed with fragments of the Rune of Death that were stolen from Malekith, and she had them kill Godwyn. But the ritual they performed killed both Godwyn's soul and Ranni's soul simultaneously. Godwyn's body survived. Ranni's body died. Her soul was preserved in a small snow-white doll, the puppet body she inhabits throughout the game. Why did Ranni do this? Her own explanation, given to the player over the course of her questline, is that she refused to be bound to the greater will. She refused to fulfill what she understood was the destiny the Two Fingers had planned for her, a destiny she describes as becoming a god in service of that outer power. She killed her own body to escape the Two Fingers' reach, to free herself from the fate they had written for her. In doing so, she also killed Godwyn, and triggered, directly or indirectly, the crisis that led to the shattering. Whether Marika knew Ranni was behind the Night of the Black Knives is unclear. Whether Marika and Ranni were working towards something together, some shared rejection of the greater will, is one of the more intriguing possibilities the game raises without confirming. What followed the shattering was the demigod war known simply as the Shattering. Each of Marika's children and their factions took up one or more great runes and fought each other across the lands between for dominance. If one of them could gather enough great runes, they could perhaps claim the Elden Ring's power for themselves and become the new god of the world. None of them succeeded. The war ground to a stalemate. The greatest battle of that conflict, the Battle of Aeonia, ended not in victory for either side, but in catastrophe. Malenia and Radagon, both of immense power, met at Aeonia Swamp and fought to a standstill. Malenia released the scarlet rot she carried, the blooming of her curse which destroyed everything around her and infected Radagon, the greatest warrior of his generation, with a disease that consumed his mind and left him a feral giant roaming the battlefield he had once commanded. The Shattering era, by the time the player arrives, is over. The wars have stopped. The demigods have retreated to their strongholds with their great runes. The world has been frozen in the aftermath of a catastrophe no one won. The Tarnished are called back. That is where the player's story begins. You are tarnished. You were among those cast out when Godfrey was exiled. Or you are a descendant of that exile, someone who lost their grace long ago and has been living beyond the lands between. Now grace calls you back, a guidance of grace golden and reaching, drawing the tarnished toward the lands between with a purpose. Become Elden Lord, mend the Elden Ring. The first figure of importance you encounter after the brief and fatal encounter with Margit the Fell Omen and the introduction to Limgrave is Melina. Melina appears as a maiden, a young woman with one eye sewn shut and the other bearing a sigil burned into the iris. She offers you a deal. She will serve as your maiden, converting your runes into levels, accompanying you on your journey, in exchange for being taken to the Erd Tree. She wants to reach the base of the Erd Tree, for reasons she does not initially explain. Her origins are unclear, which is itself significant. Maidens in the lands between are women selected by the Two Fingers to serve as guides and intermediaries for Tarnished, who are pursuing the Elden Ring. Melina is not a chosen maiden in the traditional sense. She has no Two Fingers connection. She describes herself as having no purpose given to her, no origin she can clearly name, only a mission she has inherited from a mother who she refuses to name directly, but who, given the sigils and the context, is almost certainly Marika. Melina may be Marika's daughter in some form, or a remnant of Marika, or something Marika created. The game does not say, but she carries a flame of ambition, literally, in certain endings, and her willingness to sacrifice herself to allow the player to access the Erd Tree is framed with the weight of someone who has been waiting for this purpose for a very long time. The early lands between Limgrave and the Weeping Peninsula gives you a sense of what the world looks like after the Shattering. It is beautiful and it is broken. The Erd Tree dominates the horizon, golden and enormous, impossible to miss, impossible to reach because a wall of thorns has grown up around Leyndell, the capital city, at the tree's base, blocking all access. To reach the Erd Tree, you need the power of the great runes carried by the demigods. You need to face them. Godric the Grafted rules Stormvale Castle. He is the weakest of the demigods in terms of raw power and the most desperate because of it. Godric comes from a lesser branch of Marika's bloodline, a distant relation who has spent his entire life in the shadow of his more gifted kin. His solution to this problem is grafting. He takes the limbs of defeated warriors and attaches them to his own body, adding arms and legs, and eventually an entire dragon head to his person. He is terrifying to look at and pitiable to think about. A man who could not be great through inheritance, and so tried to accumulate greatness physically, layer by layer of stolen flesh. He holds one of the great runes, and he guards it behind his castle's walls, and the knights that still serve him, and the pretension that Stormvale is still a functioning seat of power rather than a monument to a particular kind of failure. Renala of the Full Moon is the second major boss the story points you toward, though the path to her is through Liurnia rather than through her as a primary target of the Elden Ring quest. She holds no great rune of her own. What she holds is the Amber Egg, and within it, the power to rebirth. She is not an enemy in the traditional sense. She is a woman who has retreated so far inside her grief that she has become dangerous to approach. The Academy of Raya Lucaria, built on an island in the middle of Liurnia's flooded lowlands, is where she sits. The scholars of the Academy still study there, though the institution has fragmented and different factions pursue different agendas within its walls. Sorcery in the lands between has a complicated relationship with the Golden Order. The Order distrusts magic that does not draw from the Erd Tree. The Academy's tradition draws from the stars and from the moon, associated with a different cosmic power, one that the game calls the Moon, or the Full Moon, which Renala serves and which her daughter Ranni also has a connection to. Defeating Renala does not kill her. It breaks the protective amber shell her loyal scholars project around her, interrupting the rebirthing cycle she has been running on repeat, and allows you to speak to her. After that, she remains in the library, now lucid but fragile, and she can offer the player the ability to respec their character, which is one of the more elegant law-to-mechanics translations in the game. Her entire purpose in the world now is rebirth. Radagon. Star-Scourge Radagon is one of the most beloved characters Elden Ring ever created, and he gets that status almost entirely through reputation. You hear about him before you meet him. You hear about him from everyone who knew him, and they speak about him the way people speak about someone they genuinely loved. He was the greatest warrior of his generation. He loved his horse, a small brown horse named Leonard, that he continued riding even after he became so large that his feet dragged along the ground because he refused to ride a horse that could not bear the weight on its own. He was the student who surpassed his own teachers in gravitational magic, the Radagon who held the stars themselves in place through sheer sorcerous will, the Radagon who fought millennia to a standstill and was only brought low because she bloomed. By the time you reach him at the Caelid festival of combat held in his honour, he is not himself. The scarlet rot has eaten his mind. He runs on 4 limbs across the battlefield, shrieking, shooting arrows at anything that moves, no longer recognising allies or enemies or his own name. The festival is both tribute and mercy, a gathering of warriors to give him a death worthy of who he was. Fighting Radagon is one of the most cinematic sequences in the game. You summon spirits of other fighters to help you. He fires arrows from a vast distance that arc through the sky like meteorites. And then, near the end of the fight, he actually calls down meteorites, dragging stars from the sky, the celestial bodies he has been holding in place through will alone, finally unleashed as he falls. When he dies, the stars move again. This has consequences. One star in particular falls and strikes the earth, revealing a hidden path beneath the ground. This is relevant to Ranni's questline. Radagon's death was necessary for that star to move. It is possible, the game suggests, that Ranni arranged the festival precisely for this purpose. The city of Leyndell, royal capital, is where the story's next major sequence takes place. Leyndell is built around the enormous root of the Erd tree that extends down from above, a golden architecture of faith and power, inhabited by the Erd tree's loyalists and the perfumed knights who still maintain the Golden Order's traditions. It is also inhabited by Morgott. Morgott, the Omen King, is one of the great surprises of Elden Ring, not in terms of plot twist mechanics, but in terms of character revelation. He has been appearing throughout the game in disguise as Margit the Fell Omen, the first major boss, and he has been actively trying to stop you from reaching the Erd tree. He fights you again in Leyndell, his full form revealed, the Omen markings no longer hidden, the golden holy power he somehow commands, despite bearing the curse the Golden Order despises on full display. Morgott is a profoundly strange figure. He was born an Omen, condemned for it, locked in the sewers beneath Leyndell, considered an embarrassment to the divine family that produced him, and yet he devoted his entire existence to protecting the Golden Order that rejected him. He is the last true king of Leyndell, holding the capital together after everyone else abandoned it, fighting to preserve an institution that has no room for him in it. His speech when you defeat him is one of the most memorable in the game. He calls you tarnished. He says the Erd tree will not have you. He is trying, in his way, to protect something, though what exactly he thinks he's protecting and what his relationship to his mother Marika actually is are questions that linger. Below Leyndell, in the sewers where Morgott and his twin Mog were imprisoned as children, the world has decayed into something stranger and older. The subterranean shunning grounds contain things the Golden Order buried and tried to forget. The roots of the Erd tree run through these depths, and Godwyn's corrupted, soulless body is here as well, his deathless flesh having spread through the underground like a cancer. Called the Prince of Death's throne area in the game, this zone makes tangible what it means for a body to persist without a soul, to become something that is neither alive nor dead, but simply growing. Mohg is here, or rather, he has been here and has since moved on. Mohg, Lord of Blood, is Morgott's twin, and unlike his brother, he did not spend his imprisonment trying to earn acceptance from the institution that imprisoned him. He made contact with an outer god. The formless mother, the goddess of blood, reached into the sewers and gave Mohg a different kind of power, and Mohg took it. Mohg's ambition is extraordinary in its audacity. He found Miquella, Miquella, Malenia's twin brother, cursed to never grow old, is perhaps the most powerful demigod in the lore. He had been working, before the Shattering, on a project of his own. He wanted to create a new Erd tree, unaffiliated with the Greater Will, an Erd tree that could offer a different kind of grace. He had been growing one in secret in a place called the Halig tree. He had also been crafting a needle, an unalloyed gold needle that could block the influence of outer gods. He gave one of these needles to Malenia to suppress the scarlet rot and was working on something larger. Then the Night of the Black Knives happened, and the Shattering happened, and at some point in the chaos Mog stole Miquella away. He took the boy's sleeping body, still cocooned in a chrysalis, to a hidden realm reached through a secret passage in the sewers. He called it Mogwyn Palace, a place of crimson blood and white-boned birds, and pale silence, and there he placed Miquella's cocoon at the centre of a ritual designed to make Miquella into a god. Mog's god. He had named himself Miquella's consort. He was going to ascend through proximity to a divine child he had kidnapped. When you fight Mog and defeat him and interact with the cocoon, you find Miquella's arm extending from it. Limp. You can pull the arm, nothing wakes. Miquella is in there, sleeping, but he has abandoned this body. He left somehow, leaving only the physical shell behind. Where he went is part of the Shadow of the Erd Tree expansion's narrative. Mountaintops of the Giants brings you to the frozen peaks and the last fire giant. The fire giant that Godfrey left alive all those ages ago, cursed to tend the flame. It is massive and alone and ancient, and it has been waiting, in some sense, for what is about to happen. You fight it, you defeat it, and then Malenia sacrifices herself to light the flame of the giants, with herself as the torch burning the thorns of the Erd tree that blocked access to the tree's interior. She burns herself to ash so you can walk through, or if you have collected a specific item called the Frenzied Flame, you can spare her from this by having already been branded with the Lord of Frenzied Flame, which changes the ending significantly, but also means Malenia, if she survives, promises to hunt you down and kill you later. The relationship between player and companion is complicated by the specific choices available. Crumbling Farum Azula is the floating archipelago of ruins, suspended in the sky above a perpetual storm, a place outside of time, or rather a place that existed in a different relationship with time than the Lands Between does. It is inhabited by beastmen, the servants of Gurranq the beast clergyman, who is also Malekith. Malekith is here, in his full form, guarding the rune of death sealed inside himself. Fighting Malekith is devastating in its mechanics and its lore simultaneously. He is fast and enormous, and his black blade tears not just health, but your maximum health, representing the rune of death eating away at the boundary of your existence. When you defeat him, the rune of death is released, and this changes the Lands Between instantly. When Malekith falls, Leyndell transforms. The capital city, which had been golden and preserved, becomes the Ashen capital, ash-covered, the golden architecture still visible beneath the grey, the Erd tree's light dimmed. The dead begin to truly die. The cycle of rebirth the Erd tree maintained starts to break down. The world is moving toward an ending. Godfrey appears. Godfrey, first Elden Lord, has been outside the Lands Between all this time, stripped of his grace, living as a warrior among the tarnished in the lands beyond. But the calling of grace has brought him back, and he has returned to claim what he lost. He fights you first in a spectral form, his golden echo, and then in his true body, the real Godfrey, now calling himself Horalu, chieftain of the Badlands, the name and nature he wore before Marika ever made him an Elden Lord. He fights you without the trappings of divinity, raw and physical and extraordinary. There is something deeply satisfying about Godfrey as a final challenge before the endgame. He was the first Elden Lord. He built the Golden Order's military dominance. He was exiled and waited and came back, and he fights like someone who never lost a step despite the years. He does not have resentment in him exactly. He fights with what reads as joy. This is what he was made for. It does not matter if he loses. After Godfrey, the Elden Beast, Marika is found at the top of the Erd tree, broken and chained. Radagon is there, walking toward the Elden Ring with a hammer, trying to repair it. This is the Radagon aspect attempting to undo the Marika aspect's Shattering, and it has been going on, presumably, for the entire span of time since the Shattering. They have been at war with themselves inside the Erd tree for an age. You fight Radagon first, you shatter him, and then the Elden Ring transforms, and from it erupts the Elden Beast, the physical manifestation of the greater will's power, the thing that had been living inside Marika all along. It is enormous and aquatic and alien, a creature of stars and golden grace given form, and it is deeply hostile to you because what you represent is a tarnished, making a choice about what the world should be, and the Elden Beast's only interest is preserving the greater will's design. When you defeat the Elden Beast, the game gives you the choice of ending. There are several, and each says something different about what the Tarnished does with the power of the mended or remade Elden Ring. The Age of Fracture, reached by mending the Elden Ring in the most straightforward way, essentially restores things. The Golden Order is put back together. A new Elden Lord sits on the throne. Things continue, perhaps with some changes, but the basic structure of the world is preserved. The Age of Duskborn, reached through Fia's questline, acknowledges the role of death in the world. Fia, the deathbed companion, is one of the most interesting NPCs in the game. She collects the deathbed dreams of fallen heroes, holds them in her body, nurtures them. She carries Godwyn's remembrance within her. Her ending introduces the concept of true death being returned to the world as a mercy rather than a curse. The restoration of a natural cycle the Golden Order had suspended. The Age of Order is reached through the questline of Brother Corin and Goldmask, a mute scholar who spent his time searching for a flaw in the Golden Order and eventually found one. The ending attempts to perfect the Golden Order rather than simply restore or replace it. The Blessing of Despair is reached by serving Dung Eater, a tarnished of particular cruelty who wants to curse all living things with the omen's defilement, spreading the Crucible's most chaotic aspects as a corruption rather than as a gift. This ending is the bleakest by standard interpretation. The Lord of Frenzied Flame ending is reached by accepting the mark of the three fingers, the outer god opposed to the greater will, the force of chaos that wants to unmake the distinction between all things. This ending burns the world. The Tarnished becomes the Lord of Frenzied Flame, and the lands between is consumed in golden fire. Melina, if she survived the journey, promises to hunt you down and extinguish this flame. The ending has a specific poetry to it. The greater will tried to impose order. The answer to that order is not a different order. It is fire. It is the absence of everything. And then there is Ranni's ending. Ranni's ending is the one that requires the most investment from the player and tells the clearest story about what the alternative to the greater will's vision actually looks like. Ranni has been working towards something since before the Night of the Black Knives. Her plan, assembled from decades of preparation, was to remove the Elden Ring from the greater will's influence entirely. To take it and its power away from this outer god and give it to something else. Specifically, to give it to the moon. To a different cosmic power, one associated with mystery and distance, and a kind of grace that the greater will does not offer. When you complete Ranni's questline, she takes the Elden Ring and leaves. She ascends to a cosmic position, a distant god, far away, no longer interested in governing the lands between from above. Her grace, she suggests, will guide the world from a great distance, an age of stars and freedom from the greater will's direct control. Whether this is better is genuinely uncertain. Ranni does not claim to be benevolent, she claims to be independent. The age she ushers in is called the Age of Stars, and its quality as an era for the people of the lands between is not described. She is not interested in being a good god. She is interested in being a free one. That ambiguity is perhaps the most honest thing about Elden Ring's endings. None of them are clean. None of them are presented as definitively correct. The game is not asking you to find the right answer. It is asking you to choose which incomplete answer you can live with, which story about the world you want to be responsible for telling. And that, in a way, is what all of this lore has been building toward. A world that was shaped by choices made by people who thought they were doing something necessary, or righteous, or unavoidable. Marika chose to hold the Elden Ring and then chose to shatter it. Godfrey chose to leave, without resistance. Ranni chose to die, and then chose to rebuild herself toward a different future. Malenia chose to bloom, and destroyed everything around her in the process. Miquella chose to try to grow something new, and was stolen before he could finish it. The Tarnished arrives at the end of all these choices, and is given their own. The Lands Between is a place built on decisions that cannot be unmade, and the player's last act is to decide what comes next, knowing that whatever they choose will be as imperfect and as consequential as every choice that came before. There is a gravestone in the game that reads, in describing the Elden Ring itself, that it is the foundation of the Golden Order, the source of the Erdtree's wisdom, the origin of all things, and the vessel of their end. Everything in the world circles back to it. Every war, every exile, every act of love and grief and cruelty that the demigods performed, every sleepless night Miquella spent working on a needle, every moment Rennala spent clutching her amber egg. All of it flows through the ring, and the ring is broken, and you are the one who gets to decide what, if anything, it becomes. You said, "Continue, continue, 2114. Claude responded, "The world of Elden Ring does not end at its endings." The world of Elden Ring does not end at its endings. The lore extends outward in every direction, into corners of the lands between, that the main story only glances at, into characters whose stories run parallel to the central narrative without ever quite touching it, into histories that predate even the Crucible, and futures that no ending quite accounts for. So let us go deeper. The Lands Between is not a single unified territory. It is a collection of regions, each with its own character and history and relationship to the Golden Order, and spending time with each of them reveals layers of the world that the main quest does not require you to understand, but rewards you for seeking out. Limgrave, the starting area, feels like a place that was once prosperous and is now holding itself together through stubbornness. The legacy of the Stormvale Knights still lingers in the landscape, in the camps and patrols, and the general sense that this was once a well-administered stretch of land. The coastal cliffs and the beaches below them hold evidence of older cultures. The Stone Digger troll camps suggest a history of giant labour. The ruins scattered across the open fields suggest a civilization that predates even the Erdtree's current form. The stranded graveyard, where the player first arrives, is itself a strange location. It is a place for those who have died and not yet found their way anywhere, tarnished who have washed up on the shore of the Lands Between without enough grace to navigate. The cave of knowledge within it is a tutorial space, but its placement inside a literal graveyard is meaningful. You begin the game by learning your way out of death. Kalu Baptismal Church and the various sites of grace dotted across Limgrave tell a story of a faith that is still practiced, but with less certainty than it once had. The grace that flows from these sites is the Erdtree's grace, and the fact that it still flows at all, even after the Shattering, suggests that the Erdtree's foundational systems are more durable than its political structures. The golden light persists, even when the institution that interpreted it has collapsed. The Weeping Peninsula to the south of Limgrave is quieter and sadder. The Castle Morn at its southern tip was a stronghold that fell to an internal rebellion. The soldiers rising up against their commanders for reasons that the scattered notes inside the castle suggest had something to do with the despair that settled over the lands between after the Shattering. When the divine framework that gave meaning to sacrifice and service broke down, the people who had been making those sacrifices stopped seeing the point. Irina, the blind girl you meet on the road to the peninsula, is one of the game's smaller tragedies. She asks you to deliver a letter to her father, Edgar, who is holding Castle Morn against the rebellion. The letter asks him to come home. The ending of that story, which requires you to check back after certain events, is not a happy one. The game is full of these small tragedies, each one a complete story that the main narrative does not acknowledge. Liurnia of the Lakes is a drowned landscape, the lowlands flooded after some ancient event that the game does not explain in detail. The ruins of older structures visible beneath the surface, the population of survivors living on elevated ground or floating structures, or inside the academy itself. The visual impression of Liurnia is one of the most striking in the game, because it feels like a place that is still in the process of dealing with its disaster, not recovered, not destroyed, just wet and ongoing. The Carian royal family, the human lords of Liurnia, before and during the Golden Order's dominance, have a history intertwined with the Academy. They practiced a sorcery associated with the moon and the stars, distinct from the Academy's tradition, but adjacent to it, and they maintained a careful relationship with the Golden Order that required constant negotiation. The Carian Manor, perched in the northwest of Liurnia, holds the history of that family and the particular magic they cultivated. Carian Hall holds one of the game's most atmospheric sequences, the boss Loretta, Knight of the Halig Tree, who guards the path through the manor. Loretta is one of those characters the game gives you just enough of to make you wish you had more. She is a knight of extraordinary loyalty who left the Carian service to follow Miquella and his project at the Halig Tree, and she guards access to the manor, presumably to prevent people from finding the path through it to the Halig Tree's hidden location. She does not speak during the fight, she simply does her job. The underground sections of Liurnia, accessible through various means, reveal the Ainsel River and Lake of Rot. The Ainsel River is a subterranean waterway that runs beneath the lands between, flowing through caverns carved with ancient stonework, and inhabited by the Claymen, small clay-coloured humanoids, who seem to be distant relatives of the Nox people. The Nox are a culture with a significant and largely tragic history. They were a people who, at some point in the deep past, attempted to summon a fragment of a star, of the eternal city, from the heavens down to earth. The goal was to create their own eternal city, their own centre of power and grace, independent of the Erdtree's influence. The Greater Will discovered this ambition and punished it. The Nox were banished underground, their civilization relocated to the depths of the earth by divine force, their aspirations buried. There are 2 Nox cities in the underground sections of the game, Nocron Eternal City and Noxstella Eternal City. Both names include the word eternal as an aspiration that was never fulfilled. They called themselves eternal and were condemned to live underground forever, cut off from the sky they had tried to reach. The Nox built extraordinary architecture in their exile, spiralling towers and elaborate waterways and libraries of starlit stone, and they kept their traditions alive in the dark, even knowing the stars they had tried to summon would never shine on them again. The Fingerslayer blade is found in Nocron, and it is essential to Ranni's questline. Its name tells you something important. It is a weapon capable of killing a finger, one of the 2 fingers that serve as the Greater Will's mouthpiece. The fact that this weapon exists and was preserved by the Nox, who had their own reasons to resent the Greater Will, is not incidental. The Nox kept it because they hoped someone would eventually use it. The Lake of Rot is below and beyond the Nox cities, a vast underground body of water contaminated with scarlet rot. It is associated with the outer god that Millennia carries, the god of rot or the rot god, whose influence has seeped into this underground space. The architecture around the Lake of Rot suggests that someone was here, someone worshipped, or at least acknowledged the rot god before being consumed by it. Grand Cloister at the lake's edge holds Malenia's flower, a small blossom that fell when she bloomed at Aeonia, and it contains within it Astel, natural born of the void. Astel is one of the game's more visually startling creatures. It is an enormous alien being, resembling a crustacean crossed with a galaxy, its body filled with starlight and cosmic debris. It is described as a natural born of the void, something that fell from space, a meteor creature rather than a living being in any conventional sense. There are multiple Astels in the game, which raises the question of whether these are individual creatures or a type, whether the void produces them regularly, or whether these specific ones were deliberately sent. The connection between Astel and the Nox is pointed. If Astel is what the Nox accidentally summoned when they tried to pull a star down, or if Astel is the reason their attempt was punished, the lore does not make this explicit, but the proximity is suggestive. The Nox wanted something from the stars. What they got, or what came after them, was something ancient and incomprehensible and rotting. Moving to the north and east of the lands between, Caelid presents a landscape of ongoing catastrophe. The scarlet rot that Malenia released at Aeonia during the Shattering War did not stop spreading after the battle ended. Caelid is a red wasteland, the sky a permanent bleeding orange, the ground contaminated, the wildlife mutated into something grotesque. The rot-bone enemies, the scarlet rot pools, the general atmosphere of a place, in the process of being unmade, all of this is the aftermath of a single moment between two demigods who fought to a draw. The town of Gowrie, a small shack inhabited by an old sage who is not quite what he appears, offers a quest line that pulls you deeper into the rot god's influence on the region. Millicent, a young woman infected with scarlet rot who is somehow surviving it with unusual resilience, is the centre of this questline, and her story connects back to Malenia in a way the game reveals slowly, and with more tenderness than you might expect from a rot-infected side character. Millicent may be Malenia's daughter, or a fragment of Malenia, or something Malenia produced through the rot, a piece of herself that grew independently. The exact nature of the connection is left to interpretation, but the similarities are too specific to be coincidental, and the unalloyed gold needle that Millicent carries, the same kind of needle Michaela made to suppress Malenia's rot, suggests someone intended her to carry it. Her questline ends in one of two ways depending on player choice, and both of them are bittersweet in different ways. She is not a character who gets a triumphant conclusion. She gets either peace or purpose, and the game treats both as valid without pretending either is entirely happy. Celia, town of sorcery in eastern Caelid, is a ghost town in the most literal sense. Its former inhabitants, sorcerers of some tradition related to the stars, are still present as spirits, going through the motions of a life that ended some time ago. The seals that lock the buildings of Celia can be broken by lighting torches throughout the town, and doing so opens up the graves and structures inside, suggesting that the town was sealed against something, its occupants choosing to lock their secrets away rather than let them fall into the wrong hands. Farum Azula, the crumbling floating archipelago reached near the endgame, deserves more attention than the main quest gives it. Its relationship with time is genuinely unusual. The structures there appear to be from a different era, and the beastmen who inhabit it serve Gurunk, who is Malekith in a different aspect of himself. Gurunk, the beast clergyman, appears at a sanctuary in the Dragon Barrow, the elevated northern plateau of Caelid, where you can bring him Deathroot in exchange for ancient dragon and bestial incantations. He is enormous and hostile, and seems to be in a constant struggle against the Deathroot itself, consuming it to try to contain it. Deathroot is the physical manifestation of the power leaking from the Rune of Death, or perhaps from Godwyn's spreading deathless body, or from the combination of both. It takes the form of dark roots that spread across the land and create pockets of undeath wherever they appear. Gurunk consumes the Deathroot to keep it from spreading. This is Malekith's role, given a physical, almost pathological form. He spends his time eating the excess death that the world is producing because death was supposed to be locked inside him, and it keeps leaking out, and someone has to deal with it. He is both the vessel of death and its janitor, and the cognitive dissonance involved in that dual role has apparently fractured his presentation of self to the point where he operates under a different name in a different location than the one where he keeps his true form. When you meet him in crumbling Farum Azula and the fight begins, he reverts to Malekith completely. The Gurunk persona drops. What remains is the Black Blade, Marika's shadow, terrified and furious, and doing his job with everything he has. The Altus Plateau and the area surrounding Leyndell opens up the game's middle section into something broader and more politically complex. The capital outskirts are full of the remnants of the Golden Order's administrative machinery. Churches, Erdleaf camps, the legacy of a bureaucracy that governed an enormous territory and has been coasting on institutional momentum since the Shattering removed its leadership. The soldiers of Leyndell, the Golden Knights and the Tree Sentinels, and the various loyalists still patrolling the outer walls, are doing so not because they have been ordered to by any current authority, but because they were doing it before and have not stopped. There is something quietly devastating about that. An institution continuing to enforce rules that the god who made them has been imprisoned for years. The Golden Order as zombie, still moving, still dangerous, but not alive in any meaningful sense. The Erd Tree Sanctuary inside Leyndell holds the path upward toward the Elden Ring, and the upper sections of the capital reveal the scale of the Erd Tree's physical presence in a way the exterior approach cannot fully convey. The route that you fight Morgott near is only one of many. The tree's base is a mass of enormous golden roots that have grown through the city's foundations over centuries, and the city was built around them and between them rather than displacing them. This is important architecturally and symbolically. Leyndell did not choose where to put the Erd Tree. The Erd Tree was there, and the capital grew around it. The relationship between the city and the divine was always one of accommodation rather than design. The city serves the tree, not the other way around. Volcano Manor, home of Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, is one of the more deliberately uncomfortable locations in the game. Rykard was Radagon and Renala's son, which makes him a demigod of considerable power, and he used that power in a direction nobody anticipated. He fed himself to a god-devouring serpent. The serpent that lives in the Volcano Manor's depths is ancient, one of those things that predates the Golden Order, and was presumably living in the volcano long before any human built a structure above it. Rykard's decision to be consumed by it, or to merge with it, depending on how you read the interaction, was a calculated act of blasphemy. The Golden Order forbids the worship of serpents, a commandment that has ancient roots in the politics of Marika's early reign, and Rykard violated this prohibition as completely as possible by making himself into one. The result is a creature that is both Rykard and the serpent, his voice and personality still present inside the enormous scaled body, his ambition and bitterness driving the merged entity toward a singular goal. He wants to consume all the heroes of the lands between, to feast on their power, to grow strong enough to challenge everything that the Golden Order represents. There is a reading of Rykard that is surprisingly sympathetic, despite the horror of his methods. He rejected the system. He rejected the Greater Will's authority, rejected the Golden Order's rules, rejected the idea that any of the framework he was born into deserved his loyalty. His solution was extreme and grotesque, and ultimately self-defeating, but the impulse behind it The refusal to be just another piece of the divine apparatus is one the game takes seriously. The volcano manor itself is run by Tanith, a woman of striking composure who recruits assassins and operates the manor as a base for those who want to work against the Greater Will's representatives in the lands between. She is devoted to Rykard with an intensity that goes beyond political alliance into something more personal, and when Rykard is killed and you return to her, she is kneeling beside his enormous dead body, consuming his flesh. She does not stop when you approach, she does not speak. She is doing the only thing left that she can do for him. The mountaintops of the giants, beyond the grand lift of Rold, that requires Morgoth's great rune, or a specific medallion to access, is one of the most visually austere environments in the game. Everything is white and cold and enormous. The ruins of giant civilization are everywhere, but the giants themselves are mostly absent, having been killed in Godfrey's campaign. The last fire giant is the only one remaining, and he exists in a state that is less living than it is persisting. The curse that keeps him alive and tending the flame, not caring whether he wants to continue. The giant flame is associated with the fell god, and the fell god is associated with fire as an outer god. Not the frenzied flame, which is a different kind of fire, but a more primal and specifically giant-aligned burning. The history of the giants and this outer god, and what their original relationship with the lands between was, before Marika and Godfrey arrived and destroyed them, is something the game presents in fragments. There are suggestions that the giants and the Erd Tree were always in opposition, that the fell god's fire and the Erd Tree's grace were fundamentally incompatible, and that the campaign against the giants was not just a military conquest, but a theological one. The destruction of the giant civilization was the elimination of a competing cosmological framework, a fire-based understanding of existence being replaced by a golden one. The Forge of the Giants, perched at the edge of the volcano at the mountaintop's peak, is where the flame that burned the thorns of the Erd Tree had to be lit. It is the giants' ultimate weapon, kept alive by the last of their number, never used because the curse that kept him alive also kept him in place. He could not carry the fire to the Erd Tree. He could only tend it and wait, and perhaps hope that someone else would come to use it eventually. When Melina lights herself at the forge, she is using the giant's weapon for a purpose the giants might have approved of. The Erd Tree burned by the flame of the fell god's servants. There is a symmetry to it that the game does not underline. The consecrated snowfield, hidden behind a secret medallion quest that requires finding two halves of a single item separated across the entire map, is one of the more deliberately obscure areas. It is perpetually blizzarding, visibility near zero, and it hides within its white walls the location of two of the game's most significant late-game areas. The Haligtree, Miquella's secret project, and Mogwyn Palace, Mog's hidden realm. The Haligtree is reached through the city of Ordina, a small ghost town in the snowfield that requires a candle-lighting puzzle in a dark spirit realm version of the town to unlock the path upward. The Haligtree itself is extraordinary and heartbreaking in equal measure. It is a tree that Miquella grew from a single needle, a golden seedling that he nurtured toward becoming a rival to the Erd Tree, one not subject to the Greater Will's authority. It is dying. Without Miquella to tend it, without his unalloyed golden grace to sustain its growth, the Haligtree has been slowly failing. Rot has crept into its upper branches. The people who came to live under it, those who followed Miquella's vision of a grace offered without the Golden Order's exclusions, those who could not receive the Erd Tree's grace for one reason or another, the omen, the rot-afflicted, the cursed, the outcast, are still here, but the thing they came for is withering. Loretta guards the way in, and there are Knights of the Haligtree throughout, maintaining their posts long after the figure they devoted themselves to was stolen away. The persistence of devotion in the face of its object's absence is a theme the Haligtree explores at length. These people have nowhere else to go, so they stay, and they guard a dying tree, and they fight anyone who approaches. El Fael, brace of the Halig tree, the inner sanctum at the tree's heart, holds Melania. Melania, blade of Miquella, is the hardest boss in the game, by general consensus, and she deserves to be discussed not just in terms of her mechanical difficulty, but in terms of what she represents within the lore. She came to the Halig tree looking for her brother. She fought her way through the journey, containing the scarlet rot with the unalloyed gold. Needle Miquella had made for her, and arrived to find him gone, so she stayed. She sits at the heart of the Halig tree, dormant, the needle keeping the rot suppressed, waiting for something she cannot name because the thing she was waiting for was taken. When you fight her, she is the most complete expression of the lore's recurring theme of greatness that cannot find a purpose. She is perhaps the greatest warrior in the lands between. She fought Radagon, the second greatest warrior of his generation, to a standstill, and only ended the fight by destroying herself and everything around her. She has been afflicted with scarlet rot since birth, and has survived it her entire life. She is extraordinary in every measurable way, and she has been sitting in the ruins of her brother's dying dream, alone, for an unknown span of time, because there is nothing else for her to do. Her second phase, when she blooms and scarlet rot flowers erupt from her back, is one of the most visually arresting moments in the game. It is also a moment of terrible loss. The needle breaks. The rot she has been containing is released again. She is consumed by it, even as she consumes everyone around her. And if you defeat her, she does not despair. She simply wonders aloud what she was. That question does not get an answer in the base game. Shadow of the Erd Tree, the expansion, provides one. Sort of. The expansion begins with a vision of Miquella's arm extending from his cocoon in Mogwin Palace, pointing toward a golden light. You enter the land of shadow, a realm that exists in the shadow of the Erd Tree itself, a place that feels like a memory of the lands between, before the Golden Order fully established itself. It is older. The architecture is different. The enemies are different. The rules feel slightly off. The land of shadow is where Marika is from. This is the expansion's most significant revelation about the deep history. Marika grew up here, in this land of shadow, before she became a god. And the story of how she became a god, the cost of it, the thing she left behind, is what the expansion explores. Miquella is here. He abandoned his body in the cocoon and travelled to the land of shadow in a spiritual form, pulling the souls of others with him, compelling them to follow without their full understanding or consent. Several NPCs in the expansion mention being drawn here by a will not their own, following Miquella's call, and the experience is described with discomfort. Miquella is doing something. He is moving toward a goal, and the methods he is using are not gentle. The expansion reveals that Miquella has been shedding aspects of himself deliberately. He shed his Empyrean power, the divine heritage that made him a candidate for godhood. He shed his remembrance, his connection to the people who loved him. He shed his love for Melania. This last one is presented with particular weight. Miquella loved his sister. She was his twin, his companion in affliction, the person he made the unalloyed gold needle for, and he let go of that love deliberately because it would have stopped him from doing what he needed to do. What he needed to do was become a god, not an Empyrean in the greater will's service, not a new Elden Lord within the existing system, but something genuinely new, a god who could offer a grace that the Erd Tree could not, a god who could reach the people the Golden Order had excluded. The land of shadow holds the remnants of the culture Marika came from, the Hornsent people. They were a people marked by horn growth, similar to the Omen deformity, and they were the original inhabitants of the land of shadow, the people who had built their own relationship with the divine before Marika arrived and changed everything. Marika made a deal with the Greater Will. To become its vessel, to hold the Elden Ring, she had to do something, and what she did was in this land. She participated, or orchestrated, or failed to stop a massacre of the Hornsent. The expansion's lore is deliberate about leaving some ambiguity in the details, but the shape of it is clear. Marika's ascension to godhood was built on the destruction of the people she came from. The land of shadow was left in the shadow of the year tree's light, forgotten, the culture that existed there before the Golden Order smothered. Messmer is the figure who carried out that destruction. Messmer the Impaler is the expansion's central antagonist, and he is Marika's son, a son she erased from history. His name is absent from the records. His existence was suppressed. He does not appear in any of the genealogies or histories of the Marika Radagon family that the base game presents. He is here, in the land of shadow, where he has been for as long as anyone can remember, ruling over the ruins of what Marika helped destroy, keeping the lid on whatever is in the deepest parts of this realm, waiting for something he may not even fully understand. Messmer's relationship with his mother is one of absolute and unanswered devotion. He did what she asked. He performed the act that allowed her to ascend. He was put here and forgotten, and he stayed, not because he was forced to, or not only because of that, but because he believed in her. He believed she would come back. He believed it meant something, what he did, what he was asked to do. She never came back. The fight with Messmer is the expansion's emotional peak. He is not a villain in the conventional sense. He is someone who committed an atrocity in service of a parent who abandoned him, and he has been living in the shadow of that act for so long that it has become the only thing defining him. He does not know what he is outside of it. The flame he wields is not the fell god's flame, or the frenzied flame. It is a serpent flame, specific to him, associated with the serpent imagery that runs through this expansion in ways that echo the base game's prohibition against serpent worship. Messmer's fire is red and sinuous, and it moves like something alive, and fighting him feels like fighting someone who has internalized his own destruction so completely that he can weaponize it. After Messmer, the expansion goes deeper. The base of the realm, below even the ruins of the Hornsent civilization, holds something older. Romina, Saint of the Bud, a creature of enormous floral scarlet rot growth, guards one of the deeper paths. She is connected to the rot god, and her presence here suggests that the rot has been part of the Land of Shadow's history as well. Another outer god with its finger in this territory. The final area of the expansion takes you to the ancient ruins at the bottom of everything, where the first Elden Ring, the thing that existed before Marika's version, the divine vessel of the Hornsent people, is found. And Miquella is there. Miquella has completed his transformation. He has shed everything he was and remade himself into something new, a god of his own design, and he offers the final boss of the expansion, Radagon reborn. This is one of the more disorienting revelations. The Radagon you fought in the base game died at Aeonia, and his soul was released when Malekith fell. That soul has been collected by Miquella, and Miquella intends to use it. Radagon was, in the base game, described as the most powerful demigod in terms of raw physical and magical capability. His soul is Miquella's chosen material for the god he is building, his consort, his paired divine, the other half of a new divine order. Consort Radagon is the final boss of the expansion and one of the most technically demanding fights in the game. He combines Radagon's martial physicality with Miquella's grace, stars and golden light, and enormous physical power in a single opponent. Miquella floats at his side, projecting blessings, intervening in the fight. What Miquella is building is, in some ways, everything he said he wanted. A new grace, a new god, something that could offer what the Erd Tree could not. But the methods, the forced conscription of souls, the use of Radagon's soul without anything that looks like consent, the shedding of his own love for his sister, the foundation on the ruins of the Hornsent massacre, raise the question that the expansion is ultimately asking. Can something good be built on a foundation of harm? Can a new grace be genuine if the one offering it has removed from themselves the capacity to feel what grace is supposed to feel like? Michele shed his love. He shed his memory of the people he was doing this for. He became a god, perhaps, but at the cost of the qualities that made the god he wanted to become worth becoming. The expansion does not answer this cleanly. It presents Michele's project as sincere and as compromised simultaneously, and it leaves the player to decide whether sincerity is enough when the methods are what they are. The deeper lore of the game's world building includes elements that the main quest never requires you to engage with, but that reward exploration enormously. The Dung Eater's questline, for instance, reveals details about the Omen Curse and the Crucible that reframe how the Golden Order's treatment of Omen-born individuals looks. The Omen marking, the horns and growths that appear on certain individuals, is not a curse in the sense of a punishment handed down. It is, the lore suggests, a manifestation of Crucible power, an expression of the primordial vitality that predates the Golden Order. The Golden Order called it a curse because accepting it as natural would have undermined the narrative of golden grace being the only legitimate form of divine favour. Morgott and Mohg, born Omen, were imprisoned at birth for bearing markings that were actually evidence of crucible affinity, of a connection to the deepest and oldest layer of the world's life. Morgott spent his existence trying to serve the institution that imprisoned him because of this. The tragedy is not just personal, it is systemic. The Golden Order's treatment of the Omen is the clearest example in the game of how an ideological framework produces suffering not through malice, but through its own internal logic. The frenzied flame, and its relationship to the three fingers, is one of the deepest wells of lore in the game. The three fingers are the opposite number to the two fingers in a specific sense. Where the two fingers represent the greater will's drive toward order, categorization, and hierarchy, the three fingers represent the outer god of the frenzied flame, whose drive is toward undifferentiation, the dissolution of boundaries, the return of all things to a state before distinction. There is a reading of the frenzied flame that is almost compassionate. The world has produced enormous suffering through the imposition of order. The Omen are cursed because order requires categories. The Nox are underground because order requires hierarchy. Malenia blooms and destroys because an outer god's influence runs through her, and the order of the Golden Ring cannot contain it. The frenzied flame solution to all of this suffering is to remove the conditions that produce it. Not by fixing the order, by ending it. By returning everything to the crucible state before any of these distinctions existed. This is obviously also the destruction of everything that exists. Every person, every relationship, every memory, every love. The frenzied flame does not distinguish between the suffering caused by order and the joy that exists within it. It burns all of it equally. The three fingers do not offer this as a horror. They offer it as a release. Hieta, one of the NPCs who can lead the player toward the frenzied flame ending, is a blind woman who eats fingerprint grapes, fruit that carries the three fingers' influence, to try to see. She says that the sight she is looking for is the sight of the Erd tree burning, not out of malice, out of a genuine belief that the world will be better, or rather, will be beyond better and worse once it is gone. She is not a villain. She is someone who has found something that answers the pain she has been living in, and the answer is the same size as the universe. The game's treatment of the outer gods as a collective is one of its most distinctive lore choices. Rather than presenting a single divine antagonist, Elden Ring posits a plurality of vast incomprehensible forces, each with their own agenda, each using the lands between as a site of their competition. The greater will won the most visible round of this competition, but the others have not stopped. The god of rot works through millennia. The formless mother works through Mog. The frenzied flame works through the three fingers and their human contacts. The moon works through Renala and through Rani. Stars and their power work through the Nox and through various sorcerous traditions. What any of these outer gods actually are, what they experience, whether they have anything like consciousness or intention in a way that would be recognizable to a human, is left entirely open. They may be vast unconscious forces that act more like weather than like persons. They may be incomprehensibly ancient intelligences. The game does not attempt to explain the interior of an outer god, and this is correct because any explanation would make them smaller than they should be. The Elden Ring itself, before it was Marika's Elden Ring, had a previous form. The Rune of Death was once part of it. The crucible energies that the Golden Order suppressed were once part of it. The suggestion is that the Elden Ring, as it existed in Marika's era, was already a version, a curated and modified version of something older and more complete. What the complete Elden Ring would look like, what all of its runes would be before any of them were removed or suppressed, is one of those questions the game raises without answering. The Tarnished, the player character, is interesting as a lore object in ways the game barely comments on. You are someone who lost their grace. You wandered the world outside the lands between for some undefined period, which could be decades or centuries, and now grace has returned to you. You are not special in the sense of being chosen by the greater will. The grace calls to all the tarnished. You are special only in that you succeed where others fail. The Round Table Hold, the hub area where tarnished gather in a space protected from the lands between's ordinary rules, is populated by other tarnished who are also trying to become Elden Lord. They are not successful for various reasons. Nephili Lu, a warrior of great skill, loses herself in grief. Aphia is pursuing her own agenda. Dialos cannot protect the people he wants to protect. D, Hunter of the Dead, has certainties that cannot survive contact with complication. Each of them is a tarnished who found a way to stop, and the player character is the one who did not. The Finger Maiden Fia is one of the Hold's most important and most melancholy residents. She offers the player a hug. This is one of the stranger and more human moments in the game. A woman in a place outside of time offers you comfort, and in doing so, she is also absorbing your deathbed dream, taking from you a fragment of your connection to death and keeping it warm in her body. Fia is a deathbed companion, a member of a tradition dedicated to preserving the dreams of those who have died so that they can eventually find rest. She came to the Round Table Hold carrying Godwyn's remembrance, a piece of the soul of the first person, to die a true death in the lands between. She intends to use it. She intends to give Godwyn a proper death, or at least the beginning of one, by conceiving a child with his remembrance. The result of this conception is called the Mending Rune of the Death Prince, which, if used to mend the Elden Ring, leads to the Age of Duskborn ending. The Age of Duskborn is the ending that explicitly addresses what it means for death to be absent from the world. The Golden Order's removal of true death from the cycle of existence is framed by this ending not as a gift but as a distortion. Death is not the enemy. Death is part of what makes life meaningful, what gives moments their weight, what allows completion. The Age of Duskborn attempts to restore death as a natural part of the world's function, rather than as an external punishment or an enemy to be defeated. D, Hunter of the Dead, represents the other side of this question. He kills the undead, those who die and fail to return to the Erdtree's cycle, those who persist in the world as spirits or reanimated bodies, because he believes this is a mercy, that the cycle should function properly, and those who are stuck outside it should be helped back into it. He is not wrong, exactly, but his certainty that he knows what mercy is and who deserves it becomes complicated by what happens to his brother. D has a twin. This is revealed late in his questline, in a way that retroactively complicates everything you knew about him. His brother, also named D or called D by the questline, was taken by fear and is now in a state that is neither alive nor dead, suspended in the strange space fear's deathbed companion power creates. When D finds this out and confronts fear, the encounter does not go the way a straightforward revenge narrative would go. It is messier than that, and the game does not tell you whose interpretation of the situation was right. The blacksmith Hugh at the round table hold is smithing weapons for a tarnished who will kill a god. He has been there for an undefined amount of time, compelled to stay by some enchantment on the hold that he does not fully understand. He does not know how long he has been there. He cannot leave. He asks you to find his maiden, if she is still alive. There is no quest for this, no resolution. He is just a person asking, and the game does not give you a way to help him. This is one of the things Elden Ring does consistently and well. It populates the world with people whose stories are not yours, whose needs cannot be met by the player's actions, whose fates are already determined. You pass through their lives without being able to change the things they most need changed. And the game treats this not as a failure state, but as an accurate representation of what it is like to exist in a world where your power is enormous and local and insufficient. The history of the two fingers and how they came to inhabit the various locations across the lands between is a thread the game mentions without following. Each pair of two fingers sits in a different location, each with a finger reader nearby to interpret their guidance. The two fingers at the round table hold are specifically associated with the tarnished, with guiding those who have returned to their mission. The two fingers elsewhere in the world, at the Cathedral of Dragon Communion, in the hidden spaces of Liurnia, seem to serve different functions or different populations. The question of whether the two fingers are conscious, whether they suffer in their role, whether they have interests beyond the greater will's instructions, is one the game raises most directly through a single late-game detail. The two fingers at the round table hold can be killed. If certain events transpire, they die, and the finger readers mourn them, which suggests that however alien they are, however far from human their existence is, they can end. The Dragon Communion and the ancient dragon lore is a thread that winds through much of the game's world. The Church of Dragon Communion on the Weeping Peninsula and the Cathedral of Dragon Communion in Caelid offer a system of power exchange. You bring the hearts of defeated dragons and trade them for incantations that draw on dragon power. The cosmology behind this is that consuming a dragon's heart allows you to take on aspects of their nature. The ancient dragons, those that predate the Golden Order, are different from the dragons encountered in the open world. Placidusax is the most significant of these. Elden Ring's most quietly devastating secret boss, Placidusax, was the Elden Lord before Marika. Before the Greater Will chose Marika as its vessel, before the current Elden Ring was established, there was a previous god and a previous Elden Lord. Placidusax served that god, and then the god fled, for reasons unknown, leaving Placidusax behind. And Placidusax stayed. He is in crumbling Farum Azula, in a space that requires you to lie down and let the wind take you, a literal act of surrender to reach him. He is enormous and ancient and two-headed, and his fight is extraordinary in its scale. But what makes Placidusax memorable is what he was waiting for when you found him. He was waiting for his god to return. For an age, Elden Lord Placidusax has been in that time-disrupted space, suspended, waiting for a god who is never coming back. He does not know this, or perhaps he knows it and stays anyway. The distinction is less important than the image of a figure of immense power choosing to remain in a single moment of waiting rather than move forward into a world where the thing he was faithful to no longer exists. He is not the game's main antagonist. He is barely a factor in the main quest, but he is perhaps the image that most clearly captures what the entire world of Elden Ring is doing. Waiting for something that has been gone for a very long time. Unable to stop, The giant lobsters in the rivers of Limgrave are aggressive and territorial, and there is no particular reason for them to be aggressive and territorial. They just are. This is true of many of the creatures in the lands between. The ecology of the world does not fully make sense through a naturalistic lens, because the world's ecology has been shaped by divine intervention and cosmological conflict for so long that what remains is a selection of things that survived that process, many of them warped, most of them angry. The jellyfish that float through certain areas are passive and beautiful, and are, the lore suggests, the spirits of the dead, who have not yet returned to the Erd Tree. They drift, they make no demands. They just exist in the in-between space, which is perhaps the most peaceful state any entity in the lands between achieves. The Albinaurics are a created people, designed by a sorcerer of Liurnia, using magic to create a race of humans who could exist without relying on the Erd Tree's grace. They are pale-skinned and fragile, the first generation unable to walk upright, rolling on their hands. The second generation appears more human in form. They are universally persecuted by the Golden Order's representatives because their artificial origin is considered a theological problem, an imitation of divine creation that the Order will not tolerate. The village of the Albinaurics in Liurnia holds the remnants of a community that was apparently attacked and partially wiped out, the survivors scattered or hiding. The potboy, Alexander, a walking pot who is enthusiastic about fighting and considers you a friend throughout the game, is not an Albinauric, but belongs to a similar category of created living things. He mentions being stitched together at some point, though the details are vague. Alexander's questline is one of the lightest in tone in a game that frequently tends toward tragedy. He wants to fill himself with the remains of great warriors, to honour them and carry their strength within himself. He is not morbid about this, he is enthusiastic, and his final encounter with you, where he asks you to fight him and end him so that he can be filled with someone truly great, is framed not as a tragedy, but as a fulfillment. That is perhaps the fullest expression of what Elden Ring does with its lore. It builds a world of cosmic scale and geological time, of divine politics and catastrophic wars, and then it fills that world with pot people who want to be good fighters and blind women looking for a sight they can only find in a golden flame, and blacksmiths asking after maidens they will never find, and knights guarding dying trees for lords who are never coming back. The grandeur is real. The tragedy is real. The absurdity is real, and none of these cancel each other out. They coexist in a world that is too large and too old to have just one register, and the lore asks you to hold all of them at once. The history of the lands between is not a history of good versus evil. It is a history of power and the stories power tells about itself, and the people who are small enough that those stories are told about them rather than by them. Marika was extraordinary, and she was used. The demigods were extraordinary, and they were products of a system that could not accommodate what they were. The tarnished were ordinary people made extraordinary by loss, and are now instruments of a restoration nobody living fully understands. And somewhere under all of it, the crucible persists. The primordial state of undifferentiated life that the Golden Order built itself over and tried to forget. The feathers and scales and tails, and the abundance of strange forms that existed before anyone decided which forms were acceptable. It is still there, in the incantations that draw on it, in the omen-born who carry its marks, in the ancient dragons who remember what the world was before it had a colour. The crucible does not want anything. It does not have intentions. It is simply the oldest layer of the world, and it persists because the things that are oldest often outlast the things that are built on top of them. The Erd Tree burns, the stars move, the tarnish stands at the centre of what remains and chooses. You said, "Continue, continue, 2140. Claude responded, "The choice is made. The choice is made. The runes settle. The world continues in whatever shape the Tarnished gave it, but the lore does not stop at the ending. It extends backward and sideways, and into the corners where the main story never looked, and those corners are where some of the most interesting material lives. Let us talk about the people who are not demigods. The ordinary population of the lands between is easy to overlook. The game focuses so persistently on the divine and the extraordinary that the people who simply lived their lives under the Erd Tree's light become background decoration, the corpses and ghosts and abandoned buildings that dress the world without driving the story. But they were there. They built the churches and maintained the roads and farmed whatever could be farmed in a landscape increasingly hostile to ordinary life. They believed in the Golden Order, not as a political system, but as the fundamental structure of reality, because for them it was. Grace was real. The Erd Tree's light was real. Death followed by return was not a theological abstraction, but a lived experience. What happened to these people after the Shattering is the real horror of that event. The Shattering did not only produce demigod wars, it produced the collapse of every system that ordinary life depended on. The grace that guided people faltered. The cycle of return through the Erd Tree became uncertain. The roads that had been maintained by Leyndell's administration fell into disrepair. The churches that had been centres of community and mutual support became isolated outposts without supply lines. The soldiers you fight throughout the game, the ones who are still in their armour and still manning their posts, were once people with reasons for being where they were. They have stayed past any rational reason to stay, because staying is the only thing they know how to do, or because the Erd Tree's grace has locked them in a cycle they cannot break, or because whatever was left of their identity after the Shattering could only find expression in continuing the role they had before it. The Godric soldiers at Stormvale are particularly interesting in this context. Godric's rule has been deteriorating for some time. His grafting practices require a constant supply of bodies, and the soldiers who serve him are aware, on some level, that they are potential raw material. The morale of a force that knows its commander might eventually take their arms, literally, and attach them to himself is presumably not high, and yet they continue. They fight the Tarnished, they maintain the gates, they do the job. There are notes throughout Stormvale that give you fragments of individual perspectives, soldiers writing to family members they cannot reach, logistical records that reveal the castle's supply situation is dire, orders given by commanders who are clearly improvising in the absence of coherent direction from above. These notes are not presented as important lore. They are set dressing that happens to contain human beings. The faith traditions that existed alongside the Golden Order are equally interesting. The Golden Order was the dominant religion of the lands between, but it was not the only one. The dragon communion cults practiced their own form of reverence, consuming dragon hearts to partake in a power older than the Erd Tree. The crucible-adjacent traditions, the ones that drew on primordial life rather than golden grace, persisted in the margins. The star-based sorceries of the Academy represented a form of knowledge that was tolerated but never fully legitimized by the Order. The Elden Ring's faith system also had internal tensions. The Two Fingers said one thing. The fundamentalists of the Golden Order interpreted that guidance one way. The moderates interpreted it another. The Crucible Knights, the oldest order of holy warriors who predated the Golden Order and whose armour still carries crucible markings, represent a tradition that was officially absorbed into the Order while retaining elements that the Order would otherwise have condemned. The Crucible Knights are worth dwelling on. They are among the most formidable, ordinary human enemies in the game, armoured in ancient plate that has grown crucible features, tails and wings integrated into the metal itself. They predate Marika's Erd Tree. They served the primordial crucible, or served some order adjacent to it, and were eventually folded into the Golden Order as elite warriors. The fact that their armor visibly carries the Crucible's mark suggests that the Golden Order's absorption of them was always somewhat superficial. They brought their old faith with them, and it shows. The perfumers are another group with an interesting history. They use perfume tools to create alchemical mists that enhance or damage those within them, and their aesthetic is ceremonial and elaborate. They are associated with the capital and with the Altus Plateau, and the lore around their specific tradition suggests they were part of a culture of refinement and ritual that existed in the upper strata of Lanedale society. They are still fighting in the capital's ruins long after the Shattering, their elaborate ceremonial purpose continuing in the absence of the society that gave it meaning. The troll servants throughout the world, the large stone grey giants who carry tables and work alongside human soldiers, represent a conquered population integrated into the Golden Order's labour economy. They are not monsters in the ecological sense. They are working. They carry supplies. They are part of someone's supply chain. The violence they do to the player is in the context of them doing their jobs, defending positions they have been placed at, and the fact that they are so large and hit so hard is a function of their physiology being used as a resource by the people who employed them. There is a very small detail in the catacomb areas throughout the game that most players walk past without thinking about. The catacomb imps, the small clawed creatures that guard the underground burial sites, are not naturally occurring wildlife. They are caretakers. They were placed in the catacombs to maintain the bodies of the dead and manage the burial sites. They have been doing this for an unknown length of time, in the dark, with no supervision, and they attack intruders because intruding on the dead is what they were told to prevent. They are doing their job. Everything in the lands between is doing its job, or the ghost of its job, or the memory of its job, in the absence of the context that made the job meaningful. The Elden Ring's magic system, divided broadly into sorceries and incantations, reflects the underlying cosmological structure of the world in ways that are easy to miss if you approach it purely as a gameplay system. Sorceries draw primarily from the stars and from the moon, from a tradition of knowledge that the Academy of Raya Lucaria developed, and which predates the Golden Order's dominance. Incantations draw from the Erd Tree, from the dragons, from the Crucible, from the fundamentals of divine power in the world. The divide between these traditions is not just aesthetic, it reflects a genuine cosmological tension. The Academy's sorceries are grounded in a materialist tradition, in the study of the world as it is, in stars and gravity, and the physical properties of light. The Erd Tree's incantations are grounded in faith, in the acceptance of the Golden Order's authority, in the relationship between the worshipper and the divine. These are not compatible epistemologies, and the game's world reflects this through the political tension between the Academy and the Golden Order. Seluvis, one of the NPCs in Ranni's questline, represents the Academy tradition at its most morally compromised. He is a sorcerer of considerable skill and almost no ethical grounding, whose project involves creating puppet potions, substances that reduce living people to mindless servile automatons. He can use as tools. He refers to the people he has already transformed in this way as puppets, and he speaks about them with the detachment of someone who genuinely does not believe that being turned into a puppet is a meaningful harm, because the subjects, in his view, were already not particularly significant. Seluvis serves Ranni, more or less, or operates in her orbit, and the game allows you to help him with his project or undermine it. The question of whether Ranni knows exactly what Seluvis is doing and has made a specific choice about it is left somewhat open, but the possibility that she does know and permits it because Seluvis is useful is there in the text. The moral texture of Elden Ring's characters is consistently this way. The people who are working toward ostensibly good goals frequently do terrible things along the way, and the game does not exonerate them for the good goal. Ranni wants freedom from the greater will, which is a sympathetic desire. She arranged Godwin's murder. Both of these are true about the same person simultaneously, and the game presents them without resolving the tension. Dung Eater, by contrast, has no ostensibly good goal. He wants to curse all of existence with the omen's defilement, spreading the Golden Order's nightmare vision of the Crucible as a contaminant to every living thing. His motivation, insofar as he articulates one, is that he has suffered because of the Order's treatment of omen-born individuals, and he wants to share that suffering with everyone. This is revenge without the disguise of principle, and it is, in its own way, more honest than some of the loftier aims in the game. His ending, the blessing of despair, does not lead to a universe of suffering in the way the frenzied flames ending does. It leads to a world where every living thing is born cursed, where the omen deformity, the Crucible's mark, is universal. One possible reading of this, which the game does not endorse but which it allows, is that universalizing the curse removes its power as an exclusion. If everyone is omen-born, the Golden Order's hierarchy based on omen as deformity collapses. The curse is still a curse, but it is everyone's curse now. Dung Eater did not intend this as a gift, but intent and outcome are not always the same. The treatment of omen-born characters throughout the game is one of its more sustained examinations of how systems of exclusion work. The omen marking, as established earlier, is a manifestation of crucible power. It is the world's oldest life expressing itself in a body that has been told that expression is unacceptable. The Golden Order's condemnation of the omen is a condemnation of its own foundations. It built itself over the crucible, and then called the crucible's presence in human bodies a curse. Morgott experienced this his entire life. He was born in a place of power as Marika's son, and was immediately confined to the sewers for bearing the marks of a power older than the institution his mother built. He grew up in the dark. He learned somehow to use holy power, the Erd Tree's golden grace, despite being the kind of person the Order said could not access it. He emerged from the sewers as Margit in disguise and fought to protect the institution that had put him there. There is a reason Morgott's final boss speech is one of the most debated in the game. When he says that the Erd Tree will not have you, he is speaking from a position of profound personal experience with being unwanted by that institution. He knows exactly what it is like to be rejected by the thing he is defending, and he defends it anyway. This is not read by the game as noble or pathetic exclusively. It reads as both, simultaneously, which is why it lands. Mohg's trajectory is the opposite. Same origin, same sewers, same rejection, different response. Mohg reached out to something outside the system and was answered. The formless mother gave him power and purpose, and he used both without apology. He built a palace of blood in a hidden realm, and sat in it and dreamed of godhood, and stole a sleeping child to make that dream real. Both brothers are products of the same origin and the same initial conditions. What they became says something about individual choice within systemic constraint. The same system that produced Morgott's devoted self-abnegation produced Mohg's spectacular self-assertion, and neither of them escaped what was done to them at birth. Morgott was defined by defending the thing that rejected him. Mohg was defined by rejecting the thing that rejected him. Both of them circled the same wound their whole lives. Malenia's relationship with the Scarlet Rot is the game's most physically immediate version of the theme of carrying something devastating inside you. She has been infected since birth. The Scarlet Rot is an outer god's influence, made flesh, a corrosive cosmic power that wants to consume everything it touches, and it has been trying to consume her since she first drew breath. She has contained it, she has fought it, she has lived with it as a constant interior war. The unalloyed gold needle Miquella made for her suppresses the Rot's influence, keeps it from blooming, maintains a ceasefire between her will and the outer god's pressure. When she fought Radagon and lost the needle, or chose to release it, she bloomed. The rot won the interior battle and expressed itself outward, and the destruction this caused was not something she chose in the conventional sense. It was what happens when someone who has been holding something back for their entire life finally cannot hold it back anymore. That the blooming destroyed Radagon's mind, infected the entire region of Caelid, and began the process that ended the Shattering War, does not make it an act of malice. It makes it an act of exhaustion. The game presents Melania as someone who did not choose to be a weapon. She was built into one by the circumstances of her birth and the politics of the war she was put in the middle of. Radagon, similarly, did not choose to be the greatest warrior of his generation in a world that would eventually put him across from millennia. He trained for it. He was gifted for it. He loved it, by all accounts. But the thing he trained for and loved turned out to be the means of his destruction. His power brought him to a fight he could not win without losing himself, and losing himself was the only thing his power could not protect him from. The two of them, at Aeonia, fighting to a standstill that neither would back down from, is the image the game offers of what happens when extraordinary people are put inside a conflict that does not care about their extraordinary qualities. The Shattering War did not need them to be remarkable. It needed them to be useful. And when they were used and the battle ended the way it ended, the lands between did not mourn them. It simply moved on. Radagon's festival, the event that frames his boss fight, is an attempt by those who loved him to give him something the war didn't. A worthy death, a chance to be defeated by someone truly capable rather than just wasting away in a contaminated battlefield. The sorcerer Jeren, who runs the festival, genuinely loved Radagon. That is clear from how he speaks about him. And the festival is Jeren's way of honouring someone who can no longer be honoured by anything else. Ranni's companions throughout her questline are a group of people who have devoted themselves to her cause with varying degrees of understanding of what that cause actually is. Blade the Half-Wolf is the most prominent of them and the most heartbreaking. Blade is Ranni's shadow, in the same sense that Malekith is Marika's shadow. He was created to serve her, bound to her fate by design, loyal absolutely. He is half-wolf in appearance, enormous and black-furred, with a human form from the waist up and the bearing of someone who takes both the aesthetic and the responsibility of being a loyal knight very seriously. He is also one of the most genuinely warm presences in a game full of guarded, complicated, tragic people. He laughs. He calls you brother or sister when the relationship has developed enough. He is clearly enjoying himself, or was before things went wrong. The problem is the two fingers. Blade was made to serve Ranni, but his creation was managed by the two fingers. There is a directive built into him that would activate if Ranni ever moved against the greater will's interests. The two fingers intended him as a failsafe. If Ranni's rebellion went far enough, Blade's loyalty to her would flip, and he would become a threat to her rather than a protector. Ranni knew this. She had Blade sealed in an Evergale, a magical prison, at some point during her preparations, presumably to prevent this from happening. You free him as part of the questline. He is confused and hurt by the imprisonment. He does not fully understand why Ranni did what she did. He continues serving her because he chooses to, because his love for her is real independent of the compulsion underneath it. By the end of the questline, if you return to Ranni's Rise after she has ascended, you find blood there. Mad. The two fingers directive has activated. He is trying to kill everything because Ranni is gone, and the thing built into him that was meant to stop her has activated with nothing to aim at. He cannot be saved. He can only be ended. The game does not linger on this. You walk away afterward, and the quest line is complete, and Ranni is gone, and Blade is dead on the ground outside the tower. The tragedy is presented quietly, which is the appropriate register for it. He did not deserve what happened to him. He was built to be a weapon, and he tried to be a person, and for a while he was, and the weapon won in the end. E.g., the giant warrior who serves as Rani's other loyal companion, has a gentler ending, but not a happy one. He waited, as instructed, at the gate to the Carian Manor, keeping watch while the questline unfolded. When it was over and Rani was gone, he remained. There was nowhere he needed to be. He says, if you speak to him at the questline's conclusion, that he supposes his task is done. He sounds like someone who does not know what to do with himself, now that the thing that gave him purpose is complete. Preceptor Seluvis, as mentioned, ends less sympathetically. His fate, when the questline reaches its conclusion, depends on player choice, but his fundamental character, that of someone who treats people as tools, and is surprised when this has consequences, remains consistent throughout. The Black Knife assassins, the women who carried out the Night of the Black Knives, are encountered throughout the game as enemies, both alive and dead. They are fast and precise, and they use weapons coated in the Rune of Death's power, the black flame that eats your maximum health. Their order is ancient, predating the Night of the Black Knives, and their connection to Rani's planning is through a woman named Alecto, the Black Knife ringleader, who served as the operational leader of the assassination. The details of how Rani arranged the theft of the Rune of Death from Malekith are not fully explained. Malekith holds the rune inside his body. The fragments used to coat the Black Knife weapons were taken from him at some point before the Night of the Black Knives, which suggests either a specific moment of vulnerability or a long period of gradual theft, or perhaps something done in a moment when the seal was briefly weakened. The game does not specify. What matters is that it happened, and the weapons exist, and Godwyn died with them. The ghosts of the Black Knife assassins are found in various locations throughout the game, transparent and silent, still moving through the motions of that night, as if they cannot stop. The night was so significant, so cosmologically weighted, that it left ghost impressions of its participants across the world. The Night of the Black Knives is still happening, in some sense, in the spectral layer of the lands between. The Volcano Manor questline, which involves assassinating targets for Tanith and Rykard's cause, gives you a window into the network of people who have, for various reasons, decided that the Golden Order deserves to be opposed, and that Rykard's brand of blasphemy is the most coherent available opposition. The targets you're sent to kill are themselves tarnished, other people who came to the lands between seeking to become Elden Lord, but have, in the Manor's view, become servants of the Order's restoration rather than its opposition. There is something uncomfortable about this questline that the game does not quite address directly. Rykard's opposition to the Golden Order is principled in origin, even if the methods are grotesque. The tarnished you kill are not obviously serving the Order's worst tendencies. They are just other people trying to find their way in a broken world. The Manor's framing of them as legitimate targets is the framing of a faction, not a neutral judgment. The game lets you participate in this without fully endorsing it. Patches is in the game. Of course he is. Patches appears in almost every From Software title, a recurring figure who is cowardly and mercenary and loyal only to his own survival, who will betray you and then apologize and then sell you things at reasonable prices. In Elden Ring, he is in Murkwater Cave in Limgrave, and he locks you in a small room with a chest that teleports you to a distant and dangerous location. And when you make it back, he is there waiting, apologetic, selling items. Patches exists in the lore as well as the game. He is a tarnished technically. He came to the lands between with grace like everyone else. He is not pursuing the Elden Ring particularly. He is pursuing the profitable opportunities created by a world in chaos, looting ruins and selling things, and generally surviving through the gap between what people expect of others and what Patches is actually willing to do. His questline involves him finding Volcano Manor at some point, joining it with the same mercenary calculation he applies to everything, and then, depending on your choices, potentially finding himself in over his head. He is genuinely funny in the way all the Patches iterations are funny. a man of no principles who has somehow survived a world that kills everything around him by the simple mechanism of valuing his own continued existence more than anything else. The cowardice is not performed. He is genuinely afraid much of the time. He is afraid of the people he tricks. He is afraid of the things in the caves he raids. He is afraid of the larger forces moving through the world, and he navigates around them rather than challenging them. The game does not present this as admirable, but it does present it as coherent. In a world where the extraordinary end in tragedy, Patches survives. This is either a condemnation of his values or evidence that they work, possibly both. The bell-bearing system in the game, where you take the bell bearings of merchants and defeated characters to the twin maiden husks at the Round Table Hold to purchase their wares indefinitely, is one of those details that seems like a gameplay convenience until you look at it more closely. The twin maiden husks are two skeletal bodies fused together, sitting in a corner of the hold, operating a shop. They wear the masks of maidens. They are the empty remnants of maidens who have been here for a very long time. They can incorporate the bell bearings of the wandering merchants who are found throughout the world, men who wear large pots on their heads and sell items at individual locations. These merchants are interesting. They appear to be connected to each other and to a larger network, and there are scattered references to a people called the nomadic merchants, who were, at some point, a community rather than isolated individuals. What happened to that community, why they are spread across the world separately rather than living together, is suggested but not stated. There is loss there. There is a history of dispersal that the game does not fully tell. The Round Table Hold itself is a space that exists in a specific cosmological relationship to the lands between without being in it. The fire in the hearth burns. The finger readers sit with their 2 fingers and murmur. Gideon Ofnir, the all-knowing, sits near the table that gives the hold its name and observes everything and acts on almost none of it until very late. Gideon is one of the game's more interesting complications. He is the most knowledgeable person at the hold about the Elden Ring and the political situation, and he uses that knowledge to advise the other Tarnished while quietly steering outcomes in directions that serve his own interests. He does not want to become Elden Lord himself, or if he does, he is sophisticated enough to understand that his path there runs through controlling whoever does. He knows where all the shard bearers are, he knows about Miquella's cocoon, he knows about the Halig tree. He has more information than anyone else at the hold, and he dispenses it strategically. When you approach the final sequence of the game, after the mountaintops of the giants and the forge, you find Gideon in Leyndell's ashen form, blocking the path to Godfrey. He has decided that the Elden Lord should not be restored. He has decided, or come to believe, that nothing should become Elden Lord, because the Elden Ring cannot be mended. Because Miquella has been taken and Millennia is unreachable, and without all the great runes, the project is impossible. He fights you. He loses. He dies having done the thing that all his careful information management was building toward, which is act at the critical moment in the wrong direction. Everything he knew was not, in the end, sufficient compensation for the choices he made with it. The Stormhawk Dean, Alexander the Pot, the Wolf Blade, the lobsters in the river, Millicent in Caelid, Irina on the road, the soldiers at their posts, Hugh at his anvil. The lands between is full of people doing things that matter to them in a world that has no particular interest in whether what matters to them gets resolved. The divine machinery grinds forward. The cosmological conflicts continue. The outer gods press their agendas. And in the space between those enormous forces, individual lives happen and mostly conclude without the grand narrative noticing. This is the texture of Elden Ring's lore at its most granular. Not the story of Marika and the Greater Will, not the story of the Shattering and the demigods, but the story of everyone who was alive during those events and had to keep living through them. The Lands Between is an old world, older than the Golden Order, older than the Crucible's naming, maybe, though not older than whatever the Crucible was. It has been through multiple ages and retained traces of each of them, layered like geological strata, the oldest things buried deepest, but still there if you dig. What lies at the absolute foundation, below the Crucible, below the first beings and the first fires and the first stars that fell to Earth, is not something the game addresses. It suggests an infinite regress. Before the Crucible there was something. Before that something, there was something else. The world did not begin with the greater will, and it will not end with the tarnished's choice. It will continue, in whatever form the ending grants it, into ages that the law does not describe because they have not happened yet. The Erdtree will continue, or it will not. The Golden Order will be restored or remade or dissolved. A new god will watch over the lands between, from nearby or from a great distance or not at all. The stars will continue their movements. The rot will continue seeking new hosts. The frenzied flame will continue waiting in the deep places where the three fingers sit. And the people who survived the shattering and the wars and the tarnished's journey through the ruins of everything they knew will wake up in whatever morning the ending produces and try to figure out what to eat. Law does not feed people. Cosmological resolutions do not repair broken relationships. The Age of Stars does not tell anyone how to grieve. The mended Elden Ring does not speak to the soldiers who have been at their posts since before the Shattering and now have no institution left to serve. The world continues. That is both the promise and the limitation of every ending Elden Ring offers. Things change, people remain, the morning comes. The fingers of the two fingers curl in their dark chambers, or they do not, depending on what has happened. The grace flows, or it does not. The Erdtree stands golden in the distance, or it stands charred, or it stands transformed into something no one has a name for yet. And somewhere in a drowned plain in Liurnia, a jellyfish drifts through the flooded air, unhurried, going nowhere in particular, carrying the weight of a soul that has not yet decided where it wants to rest. You said, continue 2213. Claude responded, there are stories the game tells in single items. There are stories the game tells in single items. The item description is one of From Software's most distinctive narrative tools, and in Elden Ring it reaches a kind of refinement. A single ring, a single weapon, a single pot of preserving boluses tells you something about a person who existed, a moment that happened, a relationship that formed and broke and left this object behind as its only record. Most players read these descriptions once and move on, but taken together, they build a second history of the lands between that runs parallel to the main narrative, a history told from the ground level, from the perspective of the things that people made and used and lost. The Clean Rot Knight armor set tells you about the knights who served Melania directly, the warrior women who followed her into the swamp at Aeonia and were consumed by the scarlet rot alongside her, who became rot-infected themselves and kept serving anyway, their golden armor growing corrupted, their loyalty outlasting their bodies. They did not abandon her when the rot took her. They stayed in the swamp and they continued being her knights in the only way left available to them, which was guarding the territory around her resting place and dying again for her when intruders came. The Hoslow armor set tells you about a noble family of assassins, the Hoslows, who considered their craft a form of honor, who passed down a whip called the Hoslow's Petal Whip through generations, who had a code that was entirely internal to their own traditions and entirely disinterested in whether the outside world recognized it. The last of the Hoslow line you encounter through the Volcano Manor questline dies defending the family's particular dignity, which the game presents without mockery. Dignity, constructed entirely within a closed system, is still dignity. The Mushroom Crown tells you that someone, somewhere, decided that the best response to the fungal growths that afflict certain populations in the lands between was to refine them into something that could be worn and could provide a small benefit to those who use similar things. The practicality of this is touching. The world is full of terrible things, and some people respond to terrible things by figuring out whether the terrible thing can be made useful. The Erd tree's favour talisman, which increases maximum HP and stamina and equip load, was worn by those who were particularly beloved of the Erd tree. The description does not say who wore it first. It implies a long history of the Erd tree favouring specific individuals with this particular grace, and the fact that you can find it in the world and wear it yourself suggests that its most recent owner is no longer in a position to need it. The remembrances, the large items dropped by major bosses that can be traded for unique weapons or consumed for runes, each carry a description of the being they came from. Godric's remembrance describes him as the most ignoble of the demigods, a phrase that is devastating in its precision. Not the most cruel, not the most dangerous, the most ignoble, someone who had access to greatness and could not find a way to it that preserved his own worth. That one word, ignoble, tells you everything about how the world saw Godric and how Godric saw himself. Radagon's remembrance describes the scourge of the stars, the weight of his power, and the nature of the catastrophe he both prevented and embodied. The stars he held in place were a mercy to the world and a prison to the possibilities those stars would have enabled if they moved. His strength was the land's between's protection and its limitation simultaneously. The remembrance captures this without resolving it. Renala's remembrance describes the amber egg she holds, the vessel of life and potential, and the way her power shifted from the Academy's external-facing sorceries to this internal act of perpetual nurturing. She was once a queen and a teacher and a political force. She became a woman holding an egg and trying to make something that could not be unmade be made again. The remembrance does not judge this. It describes it. The Godskin Noble and Godskin Apostle items tell you about a religious order that worshipped a figure called the God of Chaos, or engaged with an outer god different from the greater will, and who achieved a form of near immortality through the collection and wearing of the skins of other godlike beings. This is presented in the lore with the same matter-of-fact quality that the game uses for everything. They wore the skins of gods. This is what they did. The skins are described with clinical detachment that is more disturbing than explicit horror would be. The godskin stitcher, the needle-like weapon they use, was made specifically for the process of removing and preparing these skins. Someone designed that tool. Someone thought through the practical requirements of the task and built an instrument to meet them. This level of institutional commitment to a practice that most frameworks would consider horrifying is one of the ways the game conveys how different its world's moral landscape is from any familiar one. The Knights Cavalry are a group of spectral knights who appear only at night and patrol specific routes across the lands between. Their item descriptions tell you they were once living knights who served a specific lord, who trained for night warfare, who rode in darkness by practice and by preference. They died and continued their patrol routes because the patrol routes were what they were. Death did not reroute them. They are not hostile in the way of something that wants to harm you. They are hostile in the way of something that has a route, and you are on it. There is a night cavalry boss in the mountaintops of the giants who carries a specific weapon that tells you something additional about that order's history, about the specific moment when they transitioned from living to spectral, which appears to have been a choice in some sense rather than an accident. They chose this continuation, which means they knew what they were choosing, and they chose to keep riding. The pulley crossbow's description mentions the tarnished genius who invented it, specifically calling them a genius, specifically noting that the genius of the invention was recognized even though the inventor was tarnished and therefore an outcast. Someone saw the work and acknowledged its quality despite the context. This small detail implies a world complex enough that even within the Golden Order's systems of exclusion, there were people who could recognize excellence across the boundary the order drew, even if they could not fully act on that recognition in social terms. The deathbird items, from the large black birds that appear at night and carry bells and inflict death on those they touch, suggest a creature that serves as a liminal figure between life and death, that exists in relationship to the Erd tree's death cycle as a kind of herald or collector. They are not explained. Their origin is not given. They simply appear in the dark and do what they do, and their items carry the weight of something ancient and uninterested in whether you understand it. The craftable items, the ones you put together from materials gathered across the world, each have a description that tells you something about the tradition of knowledge that developed the recipe. The Nomadic Warriors Cookbook series, which expands your crafting options as you find new volumes, is attributed to the nomadic merchants, the wandering traders now scattered across the world. The cookbooks are their legacy, their contribution to the lands between's material culture, a set of practical knowledge about what can be made from what. They may have lost their community. They kept their cookbooks. The Missionaries Cookbook series tells you about a different tradition, the proselytizing arm of the Golden Order, the people who travelled the lands between spreading the faith and the practical knowledge that came with it. Their cookbooks are oriented toward holy water and flame and the practical tools of religious ceremony. Someone used these, someone carried them through unfamiliar territories and made fire and gathered people around it and told them about the Erd tree. The crafting system as a whole is an argument that the lands between had, before the Shattering, a rich material culture of practical knowledge that ordinary people maintained and used. The Tarnished carries this knowledge and can use it, which positions the player character as someone who is part of the material history of the world, not just the divine one. The spirit spring locations, the geysers that launch you into the air for traversal, are a feature of the landscape that the lore barely addresses. But the fact that they exist, that the world has natural features which interact with the traversal mechanics in specific ways, suggests a physical world with its own rules that operate independently of the divine overlay. The landscape of the lands between has geology. It has weather. It has bodies of water that behave like water and underground rivers that flow according to physical principles. This is easy to overlook in a game so saturated with the divine, but the materiality of the lands between is part of what makes it feel like a real place, rather than a symbolic space. The Siofra River runs underground, not because someone put it there, but because underground rivers run underground. The scarlet rot in Caelid spreads to the lowest elevations and collects in pools and flows along gradient because contaminated liquids do this. The Erd tree's roots grow downward through the soil and rock because roots do. The game's attention to physical specificity is what allows the divine elements to feel divine rather than arbitrary. If everything operated by magical rules, nothing would feel magical. The magic is meaningful because the physical world is coherent enough to make the violations of its rules visible. The legacy dungeons, the large structured areas like Stormvale and Raya Lucaria and Lanedell, tell architectural stories that the gameplay asks you to navigate rather than read. Stormvale Castle's layout reflects a fortress designed for defense in depth, with multiple layers of wall and gate, kill zones and choke points, a structure that made sense for a military installation that expected to be attacked from outside. The fact that it has been attacked from inside, that the grafting has been going on within its walls, that the soldiers themselves may not be safe from their lord, creates a tension between the castle's design, purpose, and its current function. Raya Lucaria's architecture reflects a place built around study and demonstration. Wide open spaces for magical practice. Libraries stacked with materials. The giant wheel in the middle of the academy's deepest area, which serves some kind of power generation function related to the sorceries practiced there, suggests an institution that had moved beyond purely theoretical study into something more like applied infrastructure. They were not just learning about magic, they were building things with it. Leyndell, as an architectural space, is the most layered of all. You can see as you move through it the evidence of different periods of construction, earlier structures incorporated into or built over by later ones, the way a city grows when it grows around a sacred site over centuries. The parts of Leyndell that are oldest are deepest, both geologically in the subterranean sections and aesthetically in the style of their construction. The newest parts, the palatial structures closest to the Erd Tree's base, reflect the height of the Golden Order's confidence in itself. In its ashen form, after Malekith falls, Leyndell becomes something extraordinary. The ash covers everything equally. The golden stone and the older stone and the roots and the monuments are all the same grey-white. The destruction has been democratic in the way destruction usually is, and yet the city is still recognisable. The bones of it are intact. The architectural story is still legible. The ash is a layer of ending laid over a structure built for permanence, and the permanence is winning. Just barely. The Erd Tree itself, as a physical object in the world, deserves attention beyond its cosmological significance. It is enormous. Not large in the way of large trees, but enormous in the way that makes the rest of the landscape feel like foreground. From every elevated position in the lands between, you can see it. It organises the entire world visually, gives you a North Star that is simultaneously a destination and a presence. Game designers sometimes talk about a visible landmark that orients players, and the Erd Tree functions perfectly as this in mechanical terms. But it functions this way because the lore demands it. The Erd Tree is supposed to be the centre of the world. Everything is supposed to be oriented toward it. When it burns near the end of the game, the change to the skybox is one of the most visually striking moments. The golden light that had been everywhere is replaced by something darker and more uncertain. The orientation remains because the structure is still there, but the quality of it has changed. The world is still pointed toward the Erd Tree. The Erd Tree is just on fire now. The dragons that you fight throughout the world, not the ancient ones but the more recent ones, exist in a state of political ambiguity relative to the Golden Order. The Church of Dragon Communion suggests that some humans have always found ways to engage with dragon power outside the Order's official framework. The dragons themselves, scattered across the landscape, do not appear to be organised into a coherent faction. They simply exist, massive and territorial, in locations that suggest they have been there for a very long time and have no intention of moving. The Dragon Barrow in northern Caelid holds the densest concentration of them. These are larger than average, some of them clearly ancient, and their presence in the same region where Gurranq operates is probably not coincidental. The death root that spreads through Caelid's contaminated ground, and the dragons that have been living in the area long enough to incorporate some of that contamination into their own biology in the form of magma and rot breath variations, suggests an ecosystem of bizarre complexity that no one is managing. Farum Azula, the floating ruins, and its relationship to the dragons is one of the deeper threads in the game's ancient history. The structures in Farum Azula are made of a stone that does not match anything in the lands between. The beastmen who inhabit it are humanoid in shape, but bestial in feature, somewhere between human and something older, and they serve Malekith, who in turn served Marika. The connection between Farum Azula and the ancient dragon civilization, if they had a civilization in any meaningful sense, is gestured at in the visual language of the area without being explained in text. There is something in Farum Azula that feels like the end of the world, and not in a metaphorical sense. The place feels like what a world looks like at the end of it, not destroyed, not abandoned, simply at the point where time has run out, and what remains is doing so on inertia rather than intention. The storms below are perpetual. The ruins float without any physical mechanism that the game explains. The beastmen have their routines. Everything continues as everything continues everywhere in the lands between, past the point where it makes sense to continue. Placidusax is the reason for this. His waiting has become the organizing principle of the place. A being of his age and power, existing in a sustained state of waiting, warps the environment around him. Time does not flow normally in Farum Azula because Placidusax has been refusing to let it move forward, holding on to the moment of waiting as if releasing it would mean accepting the thing he is waiting for is never coming. This is the most extreme version of the motif that runs through the entire game, the refusal of endings, the inability or unwillingness to let something be over. Renala in her library, Morgoth in his capital, the Night Cavalry on their routes, the Cleanrot Knights in their swamp, Placidusax in his storm. The lands between is a world in which nothing has been allowed to end, and the accumulated weight of all these unended things is what makes it feel so dense and so heavy and so full. Every location you visit contains multiple layers of continuations that should have stopped. Every enemy you fight is, in some sense, still doing something they would have let go of years ago if the ordinary passage of time had been available to them. This is what the removal of the Rune of Death produced at the cultural and psychological level. Not just the failure of the Erd Tree's cycle to properly recycle the dead, but an entire civilization that did not know how to stop. That had been taught through the structure of its own divine order that things continued, that the Erd Tree sustained, that death was not a conclusion, but a pause. And then the shattering happened, and the cycle broke, and the people who had built their understanding of existence around continuation found themselves in a world that was actually ending, and they did not have the conceptual equipment to process that. So they continued anyway. They kept the posts and the patrols and the libraries and the forges and the faith, because continuation was the only mode they knew. The Tarnished, raised outside the lands between, in the lands where people died and stayed dead, where things ended and new things began, bring something into this world that its inhabitants lack. Not power necessarily, not even wisdom, but the experience of having lived in a world where things were allowed to conclude. This is one possible reading of why the Tarnished can succeed, where the lands between's own inhabitants cannot. Not because the Tarnished is exceptional, but because the Tarnished is different. The Tarnished knows what an ending looks like, because they come from a place where endings happened. Whether the Tarnished uses this knowledge to bring an ending to the lands between, or to restore what was there before, or to transform it into something new is the choice. Each ending is a different answer to the question of what to do with the knowledge that things can stop. The Age of Fracture restores the cycle, things continue more carefully. The Age of Duskborn introduces proper endings into the cycle. Death becomes real again, and the world adjusts. The Age of Stars removes the cycle's management from the current players and puts it far away, under a distant god who is not watching closely. The Frenzied Flame ends the cycle entirely, which is either the ultimate conclusion or the ultimate refusal of continuation depending on how you look at it. And Rani's ending, the Age of Stars, is in some ways the most honest about what any of these endings means for the world's actual inhabitants. It does not claim to fix anything specifically. It does not promise grace or restoration or safety. It promises distance, a God who is not pressing down on the world from above. A night sky full of stars that are genuinely far away, not outer gods expressing themselves through stellar proximity, but actual distance, the kind that gives things room to be what they are without divine pressure. Whether this is better is a genuinely open question. The game believes in the question more than it believes in any particular answer. The question of what the lands between is actually for, what purpose it serves for the outer gods who contest over it, is one of the more unsettling implications of the cosmology. If the greater will wants the lands between as the site of the Elden Ring's governance, as a project of ordered life managed according to its preferred principles, then the inhabitants of that land are participants in the project, whether they choose to be or not. They were born into a managed world without having agreed to be managed. The other outer gods presumably want the lands between for their own reasons. The rot god's interest in contaminating the world's life makes a kind of terrible sense if you think of it as an outer god expressing a preference for a particular form of existence, one based on transformation and decay and the strange fertility that follows destruction. The frenzied flame wants dissolution because dissolution is what it is. These are not goals in the human sense of strategic planning. They are expressions of nature, of what these forces fundamentally are. This makes the project of opposing them, or choosing between them, or navigating around them, something other than a moral project in any straightforward sense. You cannot argue a wildfire into burning differently. You cannot negotiate with gravity. The outer gods are more like forces than agents, and the lands between inhabitants, including the demigods, and including Marika herself, are more like weather vanes in a cosmic storm than like protagonists of their own story, except that they act as if they are protagonists. Marika shattered the Elden Ring. Rani killed her own body and rebuilt herself. Malenia chose to bloom. These are acts of will, of agency, of people refusing to simply be moved by the forces around them. The tragedy is that the forces are still there, still operating, and the acts of will are still real. And the intersection of these two facts is where all the suffering lives. The Tarnished's journey is itself an act of will inside a process that has been prepared for them. The grace that called them back, the two fingers that guide them, the round table hold that shelters them. These are all infrastructure of the greater will's project. The Tarnished is being used, potentially, to restore a system that has been broken. The question of whether the Tarnished can be an agent within this use, whether there is genuine choice available inside the structure, is what the endings are actually about. Some of them say yes. The frenzied flame ending, the most radical departure from the greater will's plans, is the clearest yes. The Tarnished takes the most anti-greater will option available and executes it. Rani's ending is a complicated yes because it involves the Tarnished helping with Rani's plan, which is itself a project of agency against the greater will, but it is still participating in someone else's plan. The age of fracture is the closest to no. The Tarnished does the thing they were called back to do, and the world is restored to approximately what it was before the Shattering, and whatever wisdom was gained in the process of getting there is not obviously reflected in the outcome. The game does not judge this. The mending of the Elden Ring is not presented as failure. It is presented as one possible answer to an enormously difficult question made by someone who had been through everything the lands between could offer and decided that what was there before was worth trying again. There is humility in that choice that the more dramatic endings do not have. The Age of Stars is extraordinary. The frenzied flame is absolute. The Age of Fracture is quiet. It is the choice of someone who looked at all the options and decided that the thing that existed, however flawed, was better than any of the alternatives they could construct from the available materials. Whether they are right is not for the game to say. The Erd Tree stands or it does not. The grace flows or it does not. Somewhere in the deep underground, in a river that was never meant to be seen, something that is neither fish nor spirit moves through water that is older than the name anyone gave it. The lands between continues. It has always continued. You said, continue, 22:21. Claude responded, there are things the game hides in plain sight. There are things the game hides in plain sight. Not hidden in the sense of being obscure or requiring external research, but hidden in the sense that they are present in the world and easy to walk past without registering what they mean. A statue in a corner, a door that opens onto a view rather than a path, a corpse positioned in a specific way that suggests the last thing it did before it stopped. From software designs environments as arguments, every room is making a case for something. The case might be about who lived here or what happened here or what the people who built this place believed about the world. You do not need to accept the argument to understand that it is being made. You just need to slow down enough to notice it. The churches of the lands between are one of the clearest examples of this. There are dozens of them scattered across every region, and they are not all the same. Some are Erdtree churches, golden and maintained, with sites of grace inside, and sometimes a merchant or an NPC seeking shelter. Some are ruined, their roofs collapsed, their altars exposed to the weather. Some are repurposed, inhabited by groups that have no relationship to the Erdtree's faith. The variety of their states tells you a story about how the Golden Order's presence varied across the territory and how the Shattering affected regions differently. The Church of Ella in Limgrave, the first church most players reach, is ruined and small and sits in a field that is otherwise empty. It is the church of a minor site, a local node in the Golden Order's network that was probably never particularly important even before things fell apart. The merchant Carle lives there, which tells you something about his assessment of the security situation. He chose a ruined church in open terrain because the ruin is uninteresting enough that nothing is targeting it specifically, and the open terrain means he can see anything approaching. The Church of Vows in Liurnia is different in every way. It is intact. It sits on an elevated ridge, commanding a view of the lake below. Inside it is a giant turtle wearing a bishop's mitre, sitting behind an altar, willing to absolve you of transgressions against NPCs you have accidentally or intentionally killed. The turtle's name is Miriel, Pastor of Vows, and he is one of the gentlest presences in the game. Miriel has been in that church for a very long time. He watched the wedding of Radagon and Renala, he says, or at least he has knowledge of it that suggests close proximity. He has outlasted the marriage, outlasted Radagon's second marriage to Marika, outlasted the Shattering, outlasted the political order that the marriage was part of. He just stays in his church and answers questions and offers absolution, because that is what he does, and he does not see a reason to stop. When you tell him things he did not know, he receives them with genuine interest and no distress. He is one of the few characters in the game who seems to have achieved something like equanimity, not because he does not care, but because his care is not contingent on outcomes. He tends his church, he offers what he can, he does not require the world to be going well in order to do this. The Divine Towers are one of the game's larger architectural statements. They are enormous towers, one in each major region, each connected to the Erdtree by invisible resonance, each serving as the activation point for the great runes you collect from the major bosses. You take the rune to the tower and climb the tower, and at the top the rune is made active by proximity to something at the summit. What is at the summit varies by tower. Some have minor bosses, some are simply empty. The wind and the view and the silence at the top, the only things present. The towers were built to serve a specific function in the Golden Order's infrastructure, the activation of the great runes that governed the demigod's power. That function still works technically, even after the Shattering. The towers are perhaps the best example of the Golden Order's infrastructure persisting past the collapse of the institution that built it. They do not know that things have changed. They just continue doing what they were built to do. The Divine Tower of Caelid is surrounded by scarlet rot and is consequently extremely difficult to approach, but the tower itself is undamaged. The rot has eaten the surrounding landscape, and the tower stands in the middle of it, intact, still functional, still doing its job in a region where almost everything else has been consumed. It is a small image, but a telling one. The Order's instruments outlast the Order. The infrastructure survives what it was built to serve. The sealed tunnel in Leyndell is an underground passage that leads from the capital's lower sections toward the Divine Tower of East Altus, and it holds within it the geological evidence of the lands between's deep history. The stone you walk through changes as you descend. The older layers are different in composition and colour from the newer ones, and some of them contain formations that suggest the land has been through processes that the Golden Order era does not account for. Things happened here before Marika. The stone remembers even when the history books do not. The 4 belfries in Leonia are a location that most players find confusing before they find it interesting. 4 towers, each with a teleporter at the top, each initially inactive except one. As you collect imbued sword keys from other locations, you can activate the others and see where they go. One goes to the Chapel of Anticipation, the very beginning of the game where you first arrived in the lands between and died to the grafted scion. One goes to a Farum Azula fragment, giving you a glimpse of that area before the main quest takes you there. One goes to a cave entrance in Nokron that leads nowhere accessible. The belfry that is already active, the one that works without a key, takes you to the Chapel of Anticipation, which means the game is giving you, almost immediately, if you explore, the option to return to the beginning, to see where you started from the outside, to fight the grafted scion again, this time with a capability to win. And when you do, you find Hyetta there, the blind woman who eats fingerprint grapes, beginning her questline. The physical design of the 4 belfries is beautiful in its simplicity. 4 towers in a line, looking out over the lake, each one a door to somewhere else. It is one of the places in the game where the world's interconnectedness is made spatially visible. Everything is reachable from everything else, if you have the right key. The Siofra riverbank, when you first descend into it through the well in Limgrave, offers one of the game's most startling visual moments. You take an elevator down through the earth and emerge into an underground space that has a sky, not a ceiling, a sky dark and full of stars, with the lights of the Nokron ruins visible above, and the river below and fireflies moving through the space in between. The impossibility of this space and underground location with an open sky is presented without comment. You are simply here now. The world has this in it. The underground sky of the Siofra and Ainsel regions is one of those details that the game offers and then declines to explain. It is beautiful, and it is impossible, and it suggests that the underground areas of the lands between are not simply caves but something else, spaces that exist in a different relationship to the physical laws of the surface. Whether this is the result of magic, or of Nox civilization, or of something older, is not stated. The sky is just there, and the stars in it may or may not be the same stars that are visible from the surface. The abandoned cave in Caelid, a small optional dungeon, holds within it a conversation that happens entirely through item placement. 2 skeletons sit at the end of a scarlet rot-contaminated passage, facing each other, with mushroom-based preserving boluses near them. The reading that the game offers through this placement is that these 2 people went into the cave together, ran out of boluses to counteract the rot, and sat down facing each other at the end. They chose to face each other rather than face the direction they came from. This interpretation might be wrong. The skeletons might have been placed there arbitrarily, but the From Software level design tradition does not place things arbitrarily, and the combination of the facing orientation and the boluses nearby is too specific to dismiss. 2 people met their end in that cave looking at each other. The Weeping Evergale on the Weeping Peninsula holds a specific enemy, the Bowls, Carian Knight, an enormous knight sealed within the magical prison. His armour is Carian, placing him as a servant of the Carian royal family, but he is here in a sealed prison rather than serving his lords. Why was he imprisoned? His item description, if you defeat him, mentions that he was placed here not for a crime, but for something else, something the description gestures toward without specifying. He is a knight who was sealed away, not as punishment, but perhaps as protection, or perhaps as containment, or perhaps both. The Evergales throughout the world are worth considering, as a system. They are magical prisons that can be opened from the outside, but not the inside. They contain things that needed to be contained. Some of these things are clearly dangerous. Ancient sorcerers, and crucible knights, and demigod-adjacent beings whose power made them threats that someone decided needed to be stored rather than destroyed. Others are more ambiguous. Who built the Evergals is not specified. The technology appears to predate the current Golden Order, given that some of what is inside them is from before that era. They suggest an older administrative capacity for containing problems, a previous civilization that had mechanisms for dealing with things too dangerous to kill and too important to let go. Blade is in one, briefly, as mentioned earlier. Lich Dragon Fortisax is accessible through one, in a specific dream state reached through Fia's questline. Fortisax is one of the ancient dragons, a figure from Placidusax's era, who came to the lands between at some point and became Godwyn's friend. This friendship is one of the more extraordinary details in the entire lore. Godwyn the Golden, Marika's firstborn son, made friends with an ancient dragon. Not a political alliance, not a strategic relationship, a friendship. Fortisax came to the lands between, and rather than being treated as an enemy or a subject, was met by Godwyn as something like an equal, and the two of them formed a bond that was significant enough that Fortisax was still present when Godwyn was killed, and his response to the killing was to try to fight the death that had taken his friend. Fortisax fought destined death, the rune of death's power expressed as a force, trying to drag Godwyn back from the true death that was consuming his soul. He could not win this fight. Nobody could win this fight against the rune of death directly. But he tried, and when he could not save Godwyn, he stayed. He locked himself into the death dream that surrounds Godwyn's soulless body. He is inside the process of Godwyn's incomplete death, still fighting a battle he cannot win, still trying to reverse something that has already happened. He has been doing this for the entire span of time since the Night of the Black Knives. When you reach him through Fia's questline and fight him, you are interrupting this vigil. The fight takes place in a golden-black dream space, Fortisax enormous and two-headed like Placidusax. His lightning red rather than golden, the corruption of Deathroot having touched even this ancient being. He is not fighting you because he wants to. He is fighting you because you are there, and he is in a state of unending combat that cannot distinguish between the death he is fighting and the tarnished who has arrived. Defeating him releases something. Fia receives what she needs to complete her purpose, and Fortisax, presumably, can finally stop. He fought for a dead friend for an entire age. He lost. He stopped when someone made him stop. This is one of the most complete expressions of devotion in the game, and it is tucked inside an optional questline in a dream within a cave beneath the city. Godwyn himself, or what remains of him, is one of the game's most visually disturbing presences. The area called the Prince of Death's Throne